Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. They said the house at the end of Calypso Lane was cursed, not haunted, not just creepy. Cursed. You can call that superstition or small town nonsense. But only if you've never stood in its shadow and felt your breath catch for no reason. Only if you've never heard it whisper when no one else was there. It was a wet, windless October when Marla Kane arrived in Greywick Hollow. A transfer from Boston. She said she needed to slow down and unwind. The realtor, shaky hands and pale eyes, offered her a discounted rate for the last house at the end of the lane. Been on the market too long, he said. People prefer something newer, less a history. Marla liked history. She was a freelance photographer, self-assigned to obscure places and local legends. Her Instagram was filled with broken churches, fog, covered forests, and decaying diners with neon signs that hadn't glowed since the 80s. When she saw the house, tall, narrow, its paint long since lost to the seasons, standing like a sentinel over a weedy yard, she didn't hesitate. She called it beautiful. That night a storm rolled in from the coast. Lightning stitched the sky. Thunder rattled the window panes. And deep within the house something shifted. It started small. A floorbird creaked upstairs, deliberate, slow. Marla paused mid-unpacking, looking up. Eyes narrowed. Then nothing. Just the rain on the roof. Probably the wind, she thought. But the air was still. She lit candles. There were no overhead lights that worked properly, and sat down to edit photos. At exactly 2:17 a.m., her laptop screen flickered. A cold gust swept through the room. The flame of the candle bent horizontal, sputtered, then righted itself. Marla looked toward the staircase. The creaking was back. This time it didn't stop. One step, then another. Then two at once, like someone rushing. She stood slowly, every inch of her skin alert. "Hello," she called, voice just above a whisper. The steps stopped. She moved to the hallway, holding the candle like a torch. Its small light revealed cracked wallpaper and faded picture frames, their contents yellowed and vague. She climbed halfway up the stairs. Nothing. Then she heard the whisper. Low, breathy, like someone exhaling words directly into her ear lead. Marla froze. The candle trembled in her hand. Her breath clouded in front of her. The air had gone glacial. She spun around. Nothing behind her. No one on the stairs. She ran to her phone, hands shaking. But the screen stayed dark, dead. No signal, no battery. She knew it had been fully charged an hour ago. When she checked the time again, the digital clock on her camera read 3:03 a.m. And then she heard it, laughter. Not joyful. Not human. Like something that pretended to be. Over the next few days, the house grew more alive. It breathed in silence. The pipes groaned like they were being squeezed. The walls emitted slow, distant knocks at night, as though something behind them wanted out. And always, there was the whispering. Marla started recording everything, not for fear, for proof. She set up motion, triggered cameras in the hallways, one at the top of the stairs, and a microphone in the attic, which she hadn't dared open yet. The footage captured nothing, except for one frame. She caught it on the camera facing the staircase, a hand, pale and too thin, gripping the banister. No body, just the hand. When she zoomed in, the fingernails were cracked and blackened. And on the back of the hand was a deep carving of a symbol. A perfect circle with a vertical slit down the center, like an unblinking eye. She looked it up. The symbol didn't exist, at least not on the surface of the internet. That night, she dreamed of a woman in white, standing at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep with eyes as dark as ink. When she woke, her camera was on, red light blinking. The battery should have been dead. She checked the footage. The camera had recorded something. Just 4 seconds. In it, her own sleeping face, and behind her, leaning from the ceiling like a spider hanging from an invisible thread, was the woman from her dream. Mouth open. no eyes. She left the house that morning. But Greywick Hollow wasn't done with her. At the town library, she found fragments, old newspapers sealed in plastic sleeves, old articles no one cited anymore. The house had been owned by a man named Ephraim Calder in the 1800s. An apothecary who was later discovered to be experimenting on children. Accusations of madness. Disappearances. Some say he sold parts of souls in glass bottles to men in long coats who never spoke. He was burned alive inside the house, the structure somehow surviving the fire. The bodies of 5 children were found in the walls, each marked with the same eye, like carving. No charges, no trial, just a furious crowd in flames. Marla's hand shook as she traced the symbol with her finger. It matched, perfectly. She tried to go back to Boston, packed her car, locked the house, took one last look in the rearview mirror, and saw herself standing in the upstairs window looking down. But she was in the car. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood there and smiled. The car wouldn't start. She screamed for help. No one came. Her phone buzzed once. A message. "You're not Marla." She turned the phone off and ran back to the house. Through the fog, through the weight of something unseen pressing on her chest, through the smell of mildew and rot, the door opened before she touched it. Inside, everything was silent. Too silent. She turned on the lights. They all worked now, all at once, too bright, too clean, as if the house had reset itself. The walls gleamed. The wallpaper looked new. The photographs in the frames were filled again. Portraits of smiling children with empty black sockets where their eyes should be. She backed away, bumping into something solid, a man. Pale, thin, wearing 19th century clothes, skin tight against his skull, his eyes hidden behind smoked glass lenses. "Welcome home," he said, and then everything went black. When she woke, she was in her bed. Daylight streamed through the window. Birds chirped. Was it a dream? She ran to the mirror and screamed, because the eye was there, carved into her forehead, fresh, bleeding. And when she opened her mouth to scream again, another voice came out. A child's voice. And it whispered, "She's almost ready." In the attic, behind the locked door she never opened, something began to move. It was awake now, and it knew her name. But it wasn't hers anymore. Not really. Not since she moved into the house that whispers. The sound started again the moment the sun dipped below the tree line. Not thunder, not wind, but that same dragging shuffle above her head. Marla sat on the edge of the couch, staring up at the ceiling as her pulse ticked faster than the second hand on the dusty wall clock. There was no mistaking it now. Someone, or something, was walking back and forth across the attic floor. She hadn't gone up there since the incident. She didn't want to. The attic was the only place in the house that didn't obey logic. No light entered it. The air up there didn't move, and when she stood near the pulled-down ladder, she could hear breathing. Long, slow, shallow. Like something sleeping, or pretending to. But something had changed since that first night. The house no longer seemed curious about her. Now, it seemed invested. It responded to her movements. When she entered a room, the door behind her would close on its own. When she stepped onto the staircase, the third step would groan as if in recognition. The house pulsed, not with blood, but with memory. It remembered her. And worse, it wanted her to remember something too. She noticed it in small ways at first. The photographs in the hall no longer held children with black eyes. Now, one of the children looked exactly like her. The dress was old-fashioned, the hair in pigtails, but the face was unmistakably hers. Her childhood. The one she buried beneath layers of distraction, dead end jobs, and silence. The air grew heavier with each passing night. The rooms began to rearrange themselves. One night the kitchen door led to the hallway. The next, it opened directly into the dining room. The bathroom mirror showed reflections that weren't hers. An old man sobbing into blood-stained hands. A woman clawing at her scalp until chunks of hair came loose. Then, One night, Marla caught her own reflection, turning its head a second after she did. She knew she should leave, but every time she packed, something happened. Her keys vanished. Her tires went flat. The road out of Calypso Lane simply looped. She would drive for miles only to find herself back at the rusted mailbox. The number 113 carved too deep into the metal to have been made by a machine. The worst came on the seventh night. At 3:13 a.m., her camera clicked by itself. Not one shot, 12 in succession. She sat bolt upright and rushed over, only to find the lens pointing directly at her bed. The photos were already loaded, each image closer than the last, as if something was creeping toward her while she slept. In the final photo, something tall and faceless stood beside her bed, its head tilted. The figure was wrapped in gauze like cloth. In its hand, it held a thin, black thread that disappeared into Marla's chest. She didn't sleep after that. She tried to call the police. The line clicked but never connected. She emailed 3 friends, but all messages bounced back. User not found. She posted to her Instagram photos of the hallway, the attic door, the bleeding carving on her forehead. No one responded. When she checked her profile, all her photos were gone. In their place were pictures she'd never taken. A hand holding a cracked tooth, a doll without eyes, sitting in a pool of red water. Her own face, smiling with lips that weren't hers. She clicked on the last image and her screen flickered. The comment section was filled with nothing but rows of the same phrase, posted hundreds of times. Let her remember. She heard the music box the next night. High, broken notes, drifting down from the attic. A lullaby she hadn't heard in 20 years. Something from her grandmother's house. The same tune that played during the worst night of her life. The night her sister vanished. She dropped the mug in her hand. It shattered on the floor, ceramic shards bouncing off her bare feet. She didn't feel the cuts. She walked toward the attic ladder, her limbs not entirely her own. Like something inside her was guiding her there, urging her to face what she had buried. As she reached up and pulled the string, the ladder descended with a groan, releasing a gust of stale, cold air that smelled of old dirt and mothballs. And something metallic. She climbed. The attic was pitch black, but as her head cleared the floorboards, a single bulb clicked on. The room wasn't what she expected. No cobwebs, no boxes. It looked new, like a child's bedroom, tiny bed. A rocking horse. A vanity mirror with a crack through the middle. The same music box sat in the center of the room, its tune now slowed, slightly warped, but still recognizable. And on the floor, drawn in something dark and still wet, was the symbol. The eye. She stepped forward, and her foot squelched in something slick, blood. It coated the wooden planks, soaking into the grain, and leading in a perfect line toward the back wall. A wall that shouldn't have been there. She pressed her hand against it. It shivered. A thin crack split open, revealing a hidden door. Without thinking, she pushed it open and stepped through. Inside was a corridor, too narrow, too long, and lined with photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands, all of the same girl, her sister. Every photo showed her in a different state of distress, crying, screaming, bound, gagged, eyes swollen shut. At the end of the hall was a single chair, and in it sat a figure. The girl was no longer a girl. Her eyes were stitched closed, her mouth sewn shut with black thread. But she turned her head toward Marla and smiled. Marla fell to her knees gasping. She remembered now. The woods, the storm, the voice that said, "Choose." Her sister had screamed, begged her not to go. But Marla had. She had run, leaving her behind. And the house had found her guilt. It had fed on it. The attic lights flickered. The music box clicked off. The Stitch girl stood, and then whispered, not with her mouth, but straight into Marla's mind. Time to switch. Pain exploded in her skull. Her body convulsed. And then, silence. Marla blinked. She was sitting in the chair, bound, mouth sewn shut, eyes blind. But she could still feel, could still hear, and in front of her, Stepping out of her skin like peeling off a coat was something wearing her face. The thing turned, adjusted its features, and walked out of the attic. She heard the ladder pull up, then lock, and the whisper came again, echoing in the floorboards beneath her. Welcome home. To the rest of the world, Marla Kane was still alive, smiling, posting again, exploring new places, but no one noticed that her eyes never blinked in photos. That her smile didn't reach her eyes. That when she said her name, there was a fraction of a second's delay. Because the house had taken her, and it was hungry again, there was something strange about the guest book. Marla, or rather, the thing that now wore her skin, found it wedged behind the living room mantel, buried in decades of dust. A simple black ledger, bound in cracked leather, its spine almost broken. She hadn't noticed it before. It hadn't been there. Or perhaps it had always been, waiting for someone who would know to look. As she pried it open, a moth fluttered out. Its wings stained the same shade of deep red as dried blood. The first page simply read, "Those who stayed." The handwriting was thin and curling, as if written with a needle rather than a pen. Each entry carried a name, a date, and something else. Just a number. A room number. Some names were crossed out. Others had annotations written in a different hand: taken, refused, returned. The last name entered, unscratched, was hers. Mauro Cannon, Oktobar Atth. Room 7. But there was no room 7, she had counted. Upstairs, there were only 6 rooms, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a storage room, the locked attic, and what should have been a linen closet but stretched too long and never seemed to hold anything at all. Yet, there it was in the ledger. Room 7. She tore through the house with a frantic obsession, eyes wide, breath shallow. She opened every door again, tapped the walls, knocked on panels. And then she noticed it. Behind the mirror in the second bedroom, a crack just wide enough to suggest a seam. She removed the mirror, exposing a perfectly square panel. A door, no handle, no lock, just a faint indentation in the shape of that same cursed symbol, the eye. As her fingers hovered near it, her skin tingled. The moment her palm touched the surface, the wall hissed. An exhale of dust and stale air. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch black stairwell that spiraled downward, even though the room was on the second floor, a place that should not exist. She didn't hesitate. She descended. The steps narrowed the deeper she went. The walls began to sweat. Not moisture, blood. Faint, sticky streaks ran along the stone, as if 1,000 hands had grazed them on the way down. The light above faded to a pinprick before vanishing altogether, but she could still see, somehow. The walls pulsed faintly, bioluminescent veins running through them, like capillaries in a massive organism. The stairs ended in a hallway lined with wooden doors, each one numbered in black ink that looked like it had been etched by fingernails. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, each door whispered as she passed. By the time she reached Room 7, the whispers had grown louder. Words began to form, layered over each other. Voices begging, laughing, screaming. She stood before the door. It was different from the others. Covered in symbols she didn't recognize. Carvings that moved when she tried to focus on them. Her fingers trembled as they reached for the handle. The door didn't open. It fell open, heavy and sudden, like it had been holding back something impatient. Inside was nothing. At first, just a gray room, walls like fog, floor that felt soft underfoot like moss or flesh. No corners, no ceiling. And then she saw them, people, or things that once were, hovering in place, limbs bent the wrong way, mouth stitched or stretched open permanently, eyes scooped out, replaced with blinking, wet holes. Some floated, others hung upside down, and each one turned to look at her without moving. They didn't speak, but she heard them. You came back. You brought it with you. It lives through you now. She backed away, but the door had sealed itself shut. There was no handle on the inside. Just the same eye, symbol pulsing in the wall, glowing with faint light. Her hands trembled as she turned back to face the shifting crowd of bodies. One of them stepped forward. It was a girl. Small. 12, maybe 13. And her face was familiar. Too familiar. Marla's breath caught in her throat. "Claire," she whispered. Her voice felt foreign in her mouth. The girl nodded slowly. Claire. Her sister. But Claire hadn't aged a day since she disappeared. She moved closer, lips parted as if to speak, but only dust poured out. Her fingers lifted, pointing to the ceiling, or what passed for it. And slowly, painfully, Marla tilted her head back to look. It wasn't a ceiling. It was a face. Gigantic. Stretching across the top of the room. Hollow, eyeless sockets that looked down. A grin that spanned from one side of the world to the other. It breathed, and the entire room shivered. The entity in the ceiling began to speak, not aloud, but through the thoughts in her skull. "Feed me. Be me. Replace the bones." She staggered back, blood rushing in her ears, her vision doubling. She was falling again, downward, as if the room itself had swallowed her. She hit the floor, or what passed for it, and opened her eyes to find herself back in her bedroom. Morning light poured through the window. Birds chirped. It was all normal. Too normal. She sat up, checked the mirror. No blood, no carving, no sign of room 7. But when she opened the guest book again, her name was gone, and someone else had written theirs. Celia Canning, OC Debar 26th, Room 8. Marla felt her heart stop. Room 8. There had never been a room 8. The house had made another, and someone had taken her place. She ran to the mirror, expecting to see her reflection. Instead, she saw Claire, smiling. Behind her in the reflection, the door to room 8 creaked open, revealing darkness thick enough to swallow the light, and something stepped through. Not Claire. Not entirely. But something wearing her face. Marla tried to scream but found she couldn't. Her voice was gone. Her mouth opened, but it was silent. Because her scream was already coming from upstairs, and it wasn't hers anymore. The mirror wouldn't stop watching her. No matter where Marla stood in the room, its surface pulled her gaze. She tried covering it with a sheet, tried moving it into the hallway, even broke it once, only to wake up the next morning with the glass, whole again, spotless, centered perfectly on her wall like it had never been touched. And always, her reflection was wrong. A half second too slow, too still. At times, her face smiled when she didn't. Other times, her eyes didn't blink. But today it was something else entirely. She woke up sweating. The sheets tangled around her legs. It was still dark, but the mirror glowed faintly, a silver shimmer curling across its surface like breath on cold glass. The air was heavy again, full of that strange smell, like mold mixed with perfume and something metallic. She turned over, pulling the covers up to her chin, eyes locked on the mirror. Her reflection lay exactly as she did, but her stomach twisted the longer she stared. The reflection's chest didn't rise and fall. It wasn't breathing. And then, as she blinked, her reflection didn't. It just kept staring, unmoving. And smiling, she sat up slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The room creaked around her, floorboards shifting beneath unseen weight. The mirror still showed her in bed, lying down, but she was standing now. That's when she understood. It wasn't a reflection. It was watching. She scrambled back, knocking over a chair. Her reflection moved for the first time, but not to mirror her. It tilted its head, one shoulder jerking up like a puppet pulled on invisible strings. Its grin widened, cracked lips stretching too far, skin splitting at the corners. Blood, thick, black, syrupy, dripped down the chin of the thing wearing her face. And then, slowly, it raised one finger and pointed directly at her. The house groaned. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed. Then another. Then the attic hatch creaked open. Something was moving through the walls. She could feel it, hear it. Wet hands brushing wood, nails dragging along beams. Something breathing, slow and eager, in the spaces behind the drywall. Marla pressed her hands to her ears and backed into the hallway. The light bulbs above her flickered to life, one by one, buzzing with heat despite the cold pressing in around her. And then came the whisper. So close it felt like it was inside her lungs. "You let her out." She turned and ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the wood. But the house shifted around her. Corridors lengthened. Doors vanished, wallpaper peeled back to reveal things that pulsed beneath. Eyes. Mouths. Names carved so deep they oozed. The house wasn't just alive, it was awake. She reached the front door and grabbed the knob. It crumbled in her hand, rusted through, rotting, useless. Behind her, the mirror appeared again, freestanding, no frame, hovering in the air like smoke made solid. This time it didn't show her, it showed Claire. Or what Claire had become, eyes black pits. A second mouth slashed across her neck, smiling wide, whispering 1,000 voices at once. Her head twitched with impossible speed. She raised her arms, and blood began to pour from her palms, running up the mirror's surface in reverse, like time itself was bending to her will. And behind her, in the reflection, stood the figure Marla had seen in the attic that first night. Tall, wrapped in gauze, holding threads in both hands leading downward into Marla's chest. She dropped to her knees, gasping. The threads began to pull. She clutched at her heart as if she could rip them free. But her hands passed through them like smoke. Her body jerked violently forward, and she understood they weren't pulling her into the mirror. They were pulling something out. Something old. Something she hadn't remembered until now. Marla was 9 years old again, in the woods behind her childhood home. Claire was crying, her leg twisted, blood pooling in her sock. "Don't leave me," she'd sobbed. "Please, Marla." But Marla had heard something else, something calling her name from deeper in the trees. A lullaby, a whisper, the promise of something warm, something that would take the pain away. She had followed it, and she never came back. Not all the way. Not really. When she finally returned to the house, 2 hours had passed. Her parents were screaming. Claire was gone. And she remembered what the voice had said. One may leave. One must stay. Now the price was being called in. The house had been waiting for the balance. Marla screamed, the sound ragged, feral. But no one would hear it. She was alone. Not just in the house, but cut off from the world. Every window showed nothing but black fog. The hallway twisted again, and now there was only one door at the end. A door she hadn't seen before. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Blood seeped from underneath it in rhythmic bursts. She stood. She walked toward it. Because she had no choice anymore. She placed her hand on the handle and it felt warm. Too warm. Alive. When she opened the door, the room inside wasn't a room. It was her. A giant heart hung suspended in the air, beating slow and loud. Threads led from it into the walls, into the ceiling, into the very structure of the house. Marla fell to her knees. Because she understood now. The house wasn't cursed. It was her. Built from her guilt. Fed by her denial. Sustained by the scream she never let out the night her sister vanished. The figure wrapped in gauze emerged again, walking across the walls like gravity meant nothing to it. It reached into the heart and pulled something out. A small, shivering figure. Claire. Alive. Or almost. And it held her out. Offered her. In exchange. Marla didn't hesitate. She took her sister's hand, and the figure leaned in close, its head cocked. Its mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, and she heard every voice from the guest book at once, screaming the same word now. The heart burst. Marla's vision turned white, and when it cleared, she was standing in the front yard. Sunlight. Birdsong. Normal again. She was holding Claire's hand. Claire blinked, looked around, confused. "Where are we?" she asked. Marla just smiled, because now she understood. One must stay, one may leave. The house stood behind her, silent still, and in the upstairs window something watched, wearing her face, smiling wide. Claire didn't speak much after they left the house. At first, Marla told herself that was normal. Trauma. Shock. A child returned from the dead, or whatever was left of her, was bound to need time. But it wasn't just silence. It was the way Claire looked at things. The way she didn't blink when she stared. The way her gaze seemed to stretch through walls, past skin. Like she wasn't seeing the world, but measuring it, mapping it, counting every crack, every shadow. And the dreams hadn't stopped either. Not for Marla. The night after they left the house, she woke up in a motel 3 towns over, slick with sweat, nails bitten to the quick. She'd dreamt of a hallway again. A long one. Black floors that rippled like water, and walls covered in moving hands, reaching. All of them hers. Same fingers, same rings, same scar on the knuckle from the fall in 3rd grade. The hands beckoned her forward, toward a door that pulsed with the sound of a heartbeat she couldn't locate. And always, at the end of the hallway, there was that same mirror, now cracked, bleeding. She'd wake up with blood under her fingernails, even though there were no cuts, sometimes with soil on her feet. Once, she found twine tied around both wrists like a gift someone had forgotten to finish wrapping. Claire didn't dream, or at least, she didn't say she did. But at night, when she thought Marla was asleep, she'd stand by the window for hours, whispering words that didn't belong to any language Marla recognized. The motel room began to change too. The wallpaper started to bubble. Mold patterns stretched across the ceiling in the shape of an eye. The mirror in the bathroom refused to reflect anything but the empty room. When Marla stood in front of it, she saw nothing, and one morning, Claire was gone. No door opened, no window broken. She simply wasn't there. In her place, laid out on the pillow with eerie precision, was the guestbook. It looked older now. Weathered, as if it had aged 50 years overnight. There was a new entry inside. Marlo Cani, Novi MBR2ND, Rome. The number wasn't even a number, just the symbol. An infinite loop, or a trap. She slammed the book shut and screamed. No one in the motel came to check. No one in the building even seemed to be there anymore. She walked out to the lobby and found the place deserted. The front desk abandoned. Dust on the counters. Lights flickering. Outside, the parking lot was full of cars, but not one had a license plate. It was then she realized something deeply wrong. There were no birds. No insects. No distant sounds of traffic. Just wind. Just the low thrum of something below the ground, like the purring of a buried machine. She opened her trunk and grabbed the only thing she trusted. Her camera. If she was going back, she needed proof. She needed to find Claire again. But as she raised the camera to her eye, the lens cracked from the inside out, webbing into the shape of the eye symbol again. Her vision blurred. A high, pitched tone shrieked through her ears, and then she wasn't in the motel parking lot anymore. She was in the hallway. That hallway, the one from her dreams. The one made of water floors and whispering hands. Except now it was real. Cold air scraped her skin. The sound of slow, dragging footsteps echoed from somewhere behind. She turned. Nothing there. But the walls pulsed with breath, expanding and contracting in time with her heartbeat. Whispers slipped through the air, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all voices saying the same thing, over and over, in imperfect unison. Find her, find her, find her. A door appeared at the end of the corridor. No knob, no markings. Just a shimmer across its surface like it was made of ice. She pressed her palm to it. The world behind it breathed in and swallowed her. Inside was a maze, not of walls, but of mirrors, endless panes of glass, each showing a different version of her. Some were younger, some were older. In some, her eyes were missing. In others, her body was stitched with twine like a rag doll. One version of her crawled across the floor with broken limbs, staring with wide, twitching eyes. Every mirror whispered as she passed. Each one repeated a memory she had tried to bury. The time she blamed Claire for the fire that wasn't her fault. The time she told Claire to go away and meant it. The time she heard Claire cry and did nothing. The mirrors weren't reflections. They were accusations. At the maze's center was a spiral staircase leading down into pure darkness. At its bottom was a room filled with water, only ankle deep but ice cold. A single mirror stood in the center, cracked from top to bottom. Claire stood in front of it. She was humming again. That same twisted lullaby. She turned slowly. And for a second, just a second, Marla saw her, her real sister, eyes wet, face soft, shivering. But the thing inside her surfaced again, stretching Claire's mouth too wide, revealing teeth far too many, layered like a shark's. Its voice was both hers, and not you left a part of yourself behind. The mirror behind Claire began to ripple. And from within, something stepped through. Another Marla, identical, but pale. Skin like wax, and stitched up the sides like a child's toy. She didn't speak. She just smiled and opened her mouth wide. A swarm of black threads spilled out, writhing across the floor toward the real Marla like living veins. She tried to run, but the water turned to tar. Her legs sank fast. The stitched Marla kept coming. Whispers crescendoed into shrieks. Claire's face flickered between human and horror. And the real Marla did the only thing she could think to do. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the guest book. She held it out. "Take it," she screamed. "Take the name back?" The stitched version of herself paused. Its head twitched. Claire lunged, but froze mid-motion, caught on an invisible thread. The mirror exploded. A burst of light, then silence. When Marla opened her eyes again, she was back in the woods. Autumn leaves falling. Sunlight through trees. A girl's laughter in the distance. She turned, and there was Claire, 9 years old. Smiling. Running through the woods like nothing had ever happened. And on the ground next to Marla, soaked in dew, was a page torn from the guest book. It read, "A name forgotten is a soul returned." She looked up. Claire was gone again, but not taken. Just playing. Alive. Free. And Marla, for the first time in her life, felt something she hadn't in years. The weight of the guilt lifting. But she knew the maze wasn't done with her. She could still feel its shape behind her eyes. Because the mirrors never forget, and neither does the house. The phone rang at exactly 4:03 a.m. Marla hadn't touched it in weeks. After the motel, after the mirror maze. She had dropped it in a river outside of Elkhorn and walked until her feet bled. She hadn't looked back. She didn't want to be found. But now, standing in the rented cabin deep in the woods, hundreds of miles from Calypso Lane, the same phone. Her phone was ringing again. It was on the kitchen counter, pristine, dry, glowing like it had never been touched by water. The screen read "Unkano Baben." She should have left it, should have walked away. But the thing about curiosity is that it feeds the house as much as guilt. With a shaking hand, she answered. Static, then breathing. Then, faintly, a voice she hadn't heard in years. "You remember now, don't you?" She didn't respond. The line hissed. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Male, old, unhurried. You were the first one. The first to walk out and forget, but we never did." A sharp click ended the call, and the house was no longer behind her. It was around her. The cabin was gone. The trees, the snow, the distant drone of insects, all vanished. Now, she stood in a hallway made of rotted wood, soaked carpet, and wallpaper that curled like peeling skin. It was Calypso Lane again, but deeper. Not the house's surface, but its belly. She wasn't alone. He was watching her now, the man behind the walls. She didn't know his name, only that he was part of it, whatever it was. The one who sewed the others shut. The one who carved the symbols. She had seen glimpses, his long, thin fingers threading through cracks in the wall, his breath fogging the mirror behind her, the shadow beneath the floorboards stretching just a little too far. He was ancient. Not in years, but in hunger. He moved without steps, appeared without warning, and now he was coming. The house groaned, and every wall around her whispered his name. Not a word, but a wet click of tongue and teeth. A sound she felt in her spine. She ran. Corridors unspooled like intestines. Doors led into each other. One room was filled with dolls, all staring. Another was a copy of her childhood bedroom, except everything was inverted, the bed bolted to the ceiling. The windows opening to black water instead of sky. She slammed a door shut, and it opened behind her. The man behind the walls was closing in. She could feel him getting closer. Not in sound or sight, but pressure. A weight in the air, thick and suffocating. The lights flickered red, and then she found the room, different from the rest. Still, clean, wooden floors scrubbed raw, walls blank, a single chair in the center. A man sat in it, not the gauze-wrapped figure from before, someone else, middle-aged, gaunt, wearing a faded suit, tie loose, hands clasped politely in his lap. He looked up when she entered, as if they'd been expecting each other. His eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just two endless pits. "Do you remember me now?" he asked. Marla said nothing. He gestured to the chair across from him. Reluctantly, she sat. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice low and smooth, like someone teaching you how to tie a noose. "You left her behind," he said, "that night. You chose the voice instead of the scream. And now, here we are again. Isn't memory such a wonderful kind of prison?" She clenched her fists. The man smiled. "You were the first child to survive the house. That matters, because it means it learned from you. You showed it that pain could be recycled. That memory could rot in layers. You taught it how to keep growing." "I didn't teach it anything," she said, voice sharp, thin with fear. "Oh," he said, raising a brow, "but you did. Every time you lied to yourself. Every time you refused to remember what happened that night. Every time you blamed the woods or the wind. You gave it more shape." He stood, slow and too tall, his limbs too long for the body they belonged to. "You created me." She shook her head. "You're not real." He laughed once, short, guttural. "I'm real enough, Marla, and I'm not just behind the walls anymore. I am the walls." The room twisted, literally twisted. The ceiling folded inward. The floor lifted like a drawbridge. Her chair slid, throwing her to the ground. The man remained upright, unmoving. From every corner of the room, walls began to crack. Fingers, long, splintered, rotting, reached through. Grasping, grabbing, pulling her back. She screamed, crawling toward the door. The man didn't follow. He simply said, "When the house finishes with you, you'll forget again. But each time, it remembers more." She pushed through the door and fell, not onto wood, but stone, cold, damp, echoing stone. A basement, somewhere deep. Somewhere far below the surface, she could hear the dripping of water. A furnace burning without flame. Chains rustling gently, as though in anticipation. And then she saw the wall in front of her, covered in names. Hundreds, thousands. Carved, scratched, scorched into the stone. Each one fading slightly more than the last. Each one a memory eaten alive. At the very bottom was her name, already half erased. She reached out to touch it, and the wall moved. 1,000 eyes opened in the stone, all of them hers. And in that moment, Marla understood the final horror. It wasn't that the house had trapped her. It was that she had never truly left. Every time she thought she had escaped, she'd only been placed deeper inside. Room after room, layer after layer. Memory folding over memory until nothing true remained. And now the house had her heart, her guilt, her name. It could wear her forever. Outside, a new guest would arrive soon. Someone curious. Someone broken. Someone just like her. And the house would whisper to them too. Just like it always had. The silence was the first thing Marla noticed when she woke. Not the ordinary kind, the peaceful, late, night hush of an empty house, but something heavier, a void. A smothering lack of sound that pressed in on her ears until she felt like she'd gone deaf. No breath. No heartbeat. Not even the static buzz of her own mind. Just a crushing, unnatural quiet that made her throat tighten with panic. She sat up, disoriented. The floor beneath her was impossibly smooth. Cool stone polished to a shine, almost mirror, like except it reflected nothing. The room around her was cloaked in shadow, yet not dark. Somehow she could see every inch of it, 4 seamless walls, No doors, no windows, no seams in the floor, nothing but the silence. It clung to her skin like smoke. When she opened her mouth to speak, no words came out. Not muted, stolen. Her thoughts were loud, frantic. She tried to scream, but the sound withered before it reached her throat. She slapped the wall. No echo. She stomped her foot. No thud. It was like the room consumed sound before it existed. Her fear began to spiral, not because of what was there, but because she couldn't tell what wasn't. That's when she saw it. Not with her eyes, but in them. A shimmer in the corner of her vision, like static crawling across her thoughts. It moved in the periphery, always just out of focus. No shape, no color. Just the idea of something present, watching. Then came the vibration, a deep, pulsing tremor barely there but unmistakable. It wasn't sound. It wasn't touch. It was a pressure behind her eyes, like someone tapping directly on her soul. And then the walls began to shift. Not physically, but visually. The seamless surfaces slowly transformed, revealing carvings, words, symbols, scenes etched into the stone in impossibly fine detail. They told stories, but not with language. Memories, not hers, began to unravel around her. A woman burying a child under a black tree. A man carving his own name into his chest. A hallway filled with doors, each marked with a different emotion: guilt, envy, shame, love. And then, at the very center of the floor, the stone cracked. Just slightly. A jagged line splitting open with the gentleness of a sigh. Marla stepped back, heart pounding even though she still heard nothing. The crack grew wider, spidering across the floor in delicate, precise veins until it formed a perfect circle around her. The floor dropped 1 inch, only one, but enough for her to understand this room was not for containment. It was a stage. The shimmer at the edge of her vision solidified. A figure began to emerge, not from the wall, not from the crack, but from the absence around her. It was made of lac, a shape defined only by what it devoured. The absence of sound, the absence of light. A human outline filled with nothing. As if the universe had forgotten to create it, its edges flickered, eroding the room like acid as it stepped forward. Still, no sound. Even her mind was going numb now, her thoughts slowing as if caught in deep water. The figure reached for her, its hand outstretched, not aggressive but inviting. In its palm was an object, a small, polished bone, human. She knew immediately it was hers. Not just any bone, but something ancient from her childhood, something surgically removed in the moment she chose to forget. A memory made flesh. As her fingers brushed the bone, the silence broke, not with a sound, but with a sensation, like ice shattering underfoot, like blood roaring back into limbs after too long a sleep. And suddenly she could hear again, but only one thing: her own voice. Not her now voice, but younger. A child's scream echoing from every wall. "Don't leave me, Marla," it repeated again, and again, and again. Each time it grew more desperate, more real. The bone in her hand pulsed with heat. She dropped it, gasping. The figure stepped back, dissolving into the floor as if it had never been, and the carvings on the wall began to bleed. Not red, not black, but white. Milk, white fluid that oozed from every groove, flooding the room with blinding, sterile light. And then she was no longer in the room. She was in the memory. Not just watching, but living it. Running through the woods again, branches tearing at her arms. Rain slicing her cheeks. Claire screaming behind her. Her own voice screaming back, "I'll be right back! Stay there!" She saw herself glance back. Saw the look on Claire's face. Saw the thing behind Claire. Tall, faceless, thin as bone and wrapped in hair instead of cloth. Saw her younger self turn away and keep running. Saw herself not come back. Marla collapsed to the forest floor, sobbing. Her adult self watching the younger from a few feet away, unable to move. Forced to witness. The figure stepped through the trees. The same one from the soundless room. It knelt beside the child Marla, whispering into her ear. Marla watched the younger version's eyes glaze over, not possession, not hypnosis, acceptance. The birth of denial. That's what the house needed. Not death, not blood. Consent. The child Marla nodded once. The deal was struck. One memory locked away. One scream swallowed. And the house grew stronger. The scene dissolved into darkness. Marla awoke on the ground, body sore, throat raw as if she'd been screaming for hours. The silence was gone. The room with no sound had vanished. Now she was standing in front of a mirror again. But this time, her reflection didn't mimic her. It looked tired, pale, weathered, older, her future. No, not quite, because in its eyes she saw the house, not behind her, not around her, but within. And for the first time, Marla said it out loud, quiet, steady, true. I never came back. Her reflection smiled sadly and nodded. The stairs hadn't been there before. Marla was sure of it. One moment she was in the hallway of what she thought was a memory, watching herself betray her sister again, reliving the guilt as the house made her swallow it over and over like glass. Then, without a shift or shimmer, the hallway folded into itself, peeling open like skin, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into pure black. No banister, no end in sight. The steps looked carved, each one etched with marks too deliberate to be wear, scratches, words, and tiny handprints that had no business being there. She didn't remember starting down them, but now she was several dozen steps deep. The house had changed its game. This wasn't about her sister anymore. This was about how far she would go to hide from herself. Each step creaked, but the sound was delayed, as if the stair remembered being stepped on a moment later. The air grew colder, heavier. It didn't carry the rot of the rest of the house. No mildew, no blood, just stillness. Sterile stillness. Like the air in a hospital room before the machine goes flatline. As she descended, the light above her shrank to a pin. She expected the darkness to wrap around her eventually, but it didn't. Instead, a soft, sourceless light followed her, always just bright enough to let her see the next 3 steps and no more. No ceiling. No floor beneath. Just the infinite coil of stairs and her growing sense of being watched by something too large to fit into one shape. After what felt like hours, or maybe minutes, time was eating itself down here. She noticed the walls had changed. At first, they were just old plaster. Then they became stone. Then flesh. Yes, flesh and warm to the touch. The kind of warmth that came from inside, like body heat. She pressed her hand to it once, just to confirm. The skin flinched, reacted, twitched. She kept moving, pulse racing. On the next step, her name was carved into the riser. Marlo Kadi, the next one Seichi left to US. The one after Sei Feed Ti Chichuhos, her foot hovered above the next stair, unwilling to fall. But the stair behind her crumbled suddenly, vanishing into blackness, forcing her forward. The house wasn't offering a choice anymore. She kept moving, each step now etched with words she didn't want to read. Liar.
Howard.
Self-Isich. She tried to shut her eyes, but the images still burned in her vision. The memory of Claire in the mirror, stitched and still. The gauze-wrapped figure offering her reflection a new name. The bone. The silence. All of it converging into something unbearable. Then came the voices. Not whispers, not screams, chants. Low, slow, disjointed syllables with no language. Dozens of them layered and overlapping, like the mutterings of things buried too deep to pronounce. Marla stumbled, almost fell, but caught herself on the wall. Flesh pulsed beneath her palm, a heartbeat, rhythmic, familiar. She realized too late it matched hers. It was hers. She was walking through herself. No, into herself. The staircase was a descent into her own guilt, her own soul. Carved up, stitched together by the house into this endless path. She screamed, but the sound didn't leave her throat. It echoed inside her skull instead, bouncing against her memories. And then the stair beneath her changed. It wasn't stone. It wasn't wood. It was bone, a rib, long, cracked, human. She looked down, and the stairs were no longer stairs at all. They were bones. Femurs, spines, jaws. All arranged in a path that led only down, each one etched with names. Not just hers now, but others. C-L-I-R, Fataward, C-Y-A-O-J-O, some she didn't know, some she did, some she had forgotten. Because the house had taken more than her sister. It had been stealing pieces of her for years. Each trauma, each suppressed ache, each lie she told herself, fed it, gave it shape, made it stronger, and then the stairwell opened. Not into a room, into a mouth. An impossibly large, gaping maw. Rows of teeth made from broken furniture. A tongue shaped like the hallway where she first heard the whisper. Walls lined with mirrors as teeth, reflecting every sin, every betrayal. At its center, a throat, deep, wet, pulsing. Marla stood frozen, because in the middle of it, nailed to the soft tissue of the throat like a crucifix, was herself. Or what was left. A limp figure, sewn with twine. Eyes replaced with buttons, mouth stretched into a grin too wide to be alive. Her double stared directly at her and said in her voice, "You can still go back. You can still pretend. But you'll always end up here." The mouth yawned wider, ready, waiting, hungry. Marla turned. The stairs behind her were gone. She stepped forward, not toward the mouth, but into it. Because there was nowhere else to go. And as she crossed the tongue, mirrors flashed all around her, showing every version of herself that had tried to run, all of them still trapped, still walking, still feeding the house. And she whispered, just once, before she vanished inside, "There is no end." Names had weight in the house. Marla didn't understand it fully, not yet, but she felt it in her bones. The deeper she went, the more the house peeled her apart, memory by memory, name by name. It didn't just feed on guilt or fear, it cataloged it, filed it, used it like rope to bind her to every room she entered. Her name was no longer just an identity, it was a tether, a leash, and the thing holding it was waiting. She woke in a long corridor lined with cabinets. Endless rows of drawers, all labeled with faded plaques. Some bore first names, others initials. One simply read Yaoyu. The air smelled like old paper and damp wood. It was cold, not icy, but numb. A dead kind of cold. Marla stood slowly, back aching, limbs heavy. Her shoes were gone. Her skin felt thin, bruised from within, like her body was no longer fully hers. The silence was back, not as thick as before, but stretched across the air like gauze. Then, faintly, the sound of drawers sliding open. One after another, like someone walking down a hallway, pulling each one without stopping. The clicks were slow, steady, closer. She turned a corner and saw him. Orit, the keeper, tall, slender, bent in half at the waist, yet towering even while hunched. Its skin looked like dried parchment, yellowed and veined, stretched tight over bones too long and too many. Its head was stitched shut where a mouth should have been, but eyes, dozens, circled its skull like a crown, all blinking in chaotic rhythm. It held a clipboard, a long, ancient thing covered in torn pages, bound together with black string. Marla froze, breath held. The keeper didn't look at her directly, but its hands moved with purpose, rifling through drawers. It pulled out a file. Read it. Tucked it under its arm. Kept walking. She followed. Not out of bravery, but because something inside her compelled her forward. When the keeper reached a vault at the corridor's end, it stopped, placed the clipboard on a pedestal, and finally turned all of its eyes to her. Not a sound passed between them, but she heard it, a voice pressed against her mind like a wet cloth. "You have forgotten too many things." "But we have not." She backed up one step. The keeper raised a hand. A drawer opened to her right. Inside was a mirror, small, cracked, familiar. Her childhood diary sat beside it. Open to the final entry she never remembered writing. "I wish Claire would just go away. I hate her. I hate her. I wish she'd disappear." The breath caught in her throat. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. "That's not true. I was just angry. I didn't mean." But the keeper moved again. Another drawer opened. This time it held a lock of hair, blonde, tied with a blue ribbon. Claire's. The same ribbon she'd worn the night she vanished. Marla reached for it. But the keeper slapped her hand away without touching her. A gust of force knocked her back, slamming her against the wall. She gasped for air. Pain radiated from her ribs. The keeper placed the ribbon into the clipboard, sealing it between the pages. The house collects everything, especially what you pretend doesn't matter. Its fingers twitched. The air thickened. The drawers all began to open. Dozens, hundreds, each revealing fragments of memory. Polaroids of birthdays she never had, report cards stained in ink, a half-burned teddy bear, bloodied shoelaces, every lie she told, every kindness she withheld, every scream she buried. It was an archive, not of history, but of damage, and her file was growing longer. The keeper pulled a quill from its chest. Yes, its chest, and dipped it in a vial that hadn't been there seconds before. Ink that shimmered like oil and bled like shadow. It held the quill over her and began to write in the air. With each word, her skin itched, then burned. Each letter stitched itself into her arm, her chest, her neck. The writing appeared on her in reverse, like someone carving a story they didn't want her to read until it was finished. She screamed, but it came out in whispers. The same word again and again, name, name, name. She understood then. The keeper didn't just guard the records. It wrote them. It created new versions, layered them on top of old ones until the person beneath disappeared. That's what had happened to Claire. To all of them. It wasn't possession. It was redaction. The erasing of a soul word by word, until only what the house wanted remained. She clenched her fists, fought the burn, and spoke her name. Not just the name the house had given her. Her real name. The one she had as a child, before the house, before the guilt. Marla Jean Kane. The room hissed. Every drawer slammed shut at once. The keeper froze. Its eyes flickered. Something had cracked. Marla stepped forward, defiant. This is my name. You don't own it. Not yet. The keeper trembled, twitching. The pages on its clipboard turned to ash, curling inward and dissolving. It reached for her, but she didn't move. She held the memory, the truth. The house recoiled, and the hallway began to collapse. Drawers bursting, names shredding, lights flickering like dying stars. The keeper howled without a mouth, the sound tearing through her skull, and then she fell. Backward, through fire, through shadow, through the space between memory and oblivion, until she landed hard on cold, damp ground, alone, shaking. In front of her, the clipboard, burned, blank, but etched into the back of it, carved with nails and blood, was a warning: EFIOU SPEAK YOUR NEM YOU BTR REM BRBUSIOURE. She looked up. The house had grown quiet, but it was still watching, always watching. And somewhere deep below, another drawer slid open. The door hadn't been there when she passed the hallway earlier. Marla was certain of it. But now, it stood at the end like it had always belonged, tall, narrow, breathing. Yes, breathing. It didn't move like a door. It pulsed, slow and wet, as if there were lungs just behind the wood. Its surface glistened faintly, covered in a sheen that smelled of copper and decay. The handle wasn't brass or silver. It was a human hand. Severed at the wrist, nailed into the door. Its fingers curled into a loose grip as though inviting hers to complete the hold. Veins ran down from the wrist into the door frame, disappearing into the grain like roots. Marla didn't want to touch it, but she knew she would, because that's what the house did. It waited, patient and still, until fear stopped being enough, until need replaced it. And then it offered you exactly what you couldn't resist. She stepped closer. With every inch, the air thickened, grew warmer, smelled like breath and wet leaves. The walls around her pulsed in sync with the door, a slow rhythm that was no longer hers but something older, deeper. Her heartbeat began to follow it, match it, the syncopation of surrender. She reached for the hand. It gripped back, tight. She gasped, but it was too late. The door inhaled, literally sucked the air around her inward, and pulled her through in a single, fluid motion. 1 second she was in the hallway, and the next she was inside, and the door was gone. There were no windows, No lights, just sound. It pressed against her like weight. Distant voices whispering in cycles, broken laughter, the hiss of boiling water. Screams hidden inside lullabies. The entire room was alive with noise, but no source. A chaos of moments playing at once. She turned slowly, trying to anchor herself, but the room spun with her. Then came the whisper she recognized. Her own voice, crying, "Don't tell anyone I pushed her." Her blood chilled. That was kindergarten. The playground. The girl with the broken tooth. She hadn't thought about it in years. Another whisper. Sharper this time, "I wish you were dead, Claire. I wish it every day." She staggered backward, hand clamped over her mouth. That wasn't just guilt. That was memory. Raw, untouched, buried so deep even she had convinced herself it never happened. The room amplified it, fed on it, then showed it. The walls changed, rippling until they became screens. Not technological, organic, like tissue holding images in place. On one side, she saw herself as a child, standing over a fallen Claire, fists clenched, lip trembling. On the other wall, her teenage self deleting voicemails from her mother, eyes red and dead. Another screen showed her reflection, older, present, staring back at her, but grinning wide, with eyes that weren't hers. The voices rose in volume. "This is you. This is all you. This is why we let you live." Marla covered her ears. "No," she muttered. "No, I tried. I didn't mean." But the room didn't care. It wasn't punishing her. It was introducing her to herself, piece by piece. Until all the masks fell away, the floor softened beneath her feet. When she looked down, it was no longer wood. It was skin, covered in scars, each one labeled with words that made her heart crack. Liar, Abaddon, I.S. She dropped to her knees, trembling. And that's when she heard the second heartbeat, not hers, not the house's, but something else, slow, deep, measured, coming from beneath the floor. She pressed her hand to the ground. It kicked back. Something was below, and it was awake. The skin split, just a little, just enough for a single eye to open. Bloodshot, yellowed, weeping a black tear. It looked directly at her, and blinked. The room whispered, "She's waiting." Then everything collapsed. She fell through the floor like it had never been solid, tumbling into darkness. No structure, no gravity, just memory and noise tearing at her mind. Faces flashed by, her parents' grief, Claire's last smile. The gauze wrapped figure with threads in its hands. The stitched child, the mirror with her reflection still trapped inside. The keeper, writing names she couldn't stop. The mouth she walked into, the hands pulling at her name, and then nothing. Until she landed, hard, in a chair, spotlight above, darkness all around, a stage, a theater, but no audience. Only a microphone in front of her, old, rusted, and behind it, a sign hanging crooked from two rusted nails, Cohen Fisanracuarade To Parakide. A door behind her sealed shut with a hiss. She was alone. And the house wanted her to speak. Her name was no longer enough. Now it wanted her truth. All of it. Because the deeper she went, the more the house demanded. Not just memory, but ownership. And this time, it would not let her leave without everything. The microphone crackled before she even touched it. It hissed like something was already breathing through it, waiting on the other end, patient as rot. Marla sat rigid in the metal chair, knees pulled close, spine tight with dread. The spotlight burned down, hot and clinical, the only source of light in a space that felt cavernous and suffocating. Her shadow stretched impossibly long across the floor, vanishing into black. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was pregnant. It carried pressure, expectation. The sign above her still hung, crooked and grim. Saunfesason recuela do Parasi died. There was no visible exit. No more doors. No choice. She leaned toward the microphone, throat dry, tongue thick behind her teeth. Her breath trembled against the metal mesh. I don't know what you want me to say." No response. Not even her own echo. The microphone swallowed the words like they'd never existed. She tried again. "I didn't mean to leave her. I was scared. I thought she was behind me. Still nothing. Her reflection hadn't moved in the darkened wall opposite her, but she could sense its grin widening. This wasn't a plea for guilt. It was a demand for truth. The house knew the difference, and it would not move until she stopped lying, even to herself. Her hands gripped the edges of the chair. Cold metal bit into her palms. The walls around her breathed faintly, like lungs in slow panic. The air tightened, contracting closer and closer. "Fine," she said. Her voice cracked on the edge of a sob. "Fine." She leaned in. I hated her. The microphone twitched, buzzed, but still no reply. I loved her, but I hated her too. Claire was always perfect, always brave. Everyone worried about her. Always her. I was invisible next to her. The lights dimmed just slightly. She kept going. I wanted space. I wanted to feel something that was mine. That day in the woods, when she tripped, I didn't turn around because I didn't want to. I told myself I thought she was fine, that she'd catch up, but that's not true. I knew. I knew she was crying, that she was hurt, and I still left her. The microphone hissed, then glowed faintly red, encouraging, alive. I told everyone I got lost. I said I tried to find help, but I hid in the old shed. I sat there for hours and did nothing. I waited for someone to find me first. I wanted to be the center for once. I didn't care if she was scared, or bleeding, or alone. A sound finally responded, a faint click, like a lock unlatching deep beneath the floor. Marla exhaled hard, as if the truth had cost her something physical. But the room wasn't done. The microphone surged with static, then cleared to a single voice. "Claire's, you never came back." It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was hollow, tired. A statement made of weight instead of words. Marla stood. The chair screeched back across the concrete. She turned in a slow circle. There was still no exit. But the light above her blinked twice. Then again, a pattern, Morse. She remembered it from high school. COME, a panel slid open in the floor. She peered down into the dark. No ladder, no stairs. Just a vertical drop that led nowhere visible. But the house had spoken. It wanted her deeper. The only way forward was down. She sat at the edge of the hole, legs dangling into the void. Took one breath, then let go, falling, longer this time, longer than physics allowed. The air around her vibrated with screams and lullabies, and the click of typewriter keys, spelling out names she hadn't remembered in years. She landed softly, gently, almost kindly. This time the room looked like a chapel, but it was wrong. No pews, no altar, no windows, only the walls, each one covered in masks. Hundreds of them, some wooden, some porcelain, some made of stretched skin stitched at the edges. All were painted to resemble different versions of her. There was one of her as a child, smiling too wide. One as a teenager, eyes sunken, lips cracked. One with her mouth sewn shut. One with no face at all. At the room's center was a well. No rope, no bucket. Only black water inside that barely rippled. A new sign above it, CHUOS Marla approached. Her reflection in the water shifted constantly. Each second, it became a different version of her. Each memory she had locked away wore a face now, fluid and flickering. She could no longer tell which one was real, which one belonged. Then she saw her current self, bruised, broken, bleeding truth, and she reached down into the water. It was cold. It didn't resist her. It welcomed her. Fingers first, then wrist, then elbow. Then her entire arm swallowed to the shoulder. She expected pain. Instead, she felt a pulse, like a second heartbeat connecting to hers, when something pressed into her palm. When she pulled her hand out, she held a key, old, made of bone, wrapped in a strip of blue fabric, Claire's ribbon. No lock was visible in the room, but one of the masks had changed. It now hung lower than the others, at eye level, and its eyes moved, tracking her. Marla approached slowly, every cell in her body screaming that this was wrong, that this was next. She lifted the key, inserted it between the mask's lips. The mouth opened, not hinged, peeled, and the wall behind it split wide like a wound, revealing a staircase leading down into flickering amber light. She turned once to look back at the chapel of masks. They stared, silently judging, or maybe waiting for their turn. She stepped through, the wound sealed behind her. The staircase throbbed with warmth. It smelled like earth, and something deeper, something animal. The truth wasn't the end. It was just the offering. Now, the house wanted her identity, the version she would take forward. Because the next room wasn't about the past. It was about becoming. And the house was ready to show her who she had always been. The staircase narrowed with each step, pressing tighter around Marla's shoulders until she felt like she was being swallowed again, not by darkness, but by something watching from within the walls themselves. The amber light ahead pulsed faintly, not from bulbs or torches, but from something organic, something that glowed like bioluminescent skin. Every breath she took tasted like dust, rust, and breath that didn't belong to her. By the time the stairs opened into the next chamber, she was shaking. The room was circular, enormous. The air was warm, heavy with moisture. The light came from above, something pulsing behind a lattice of bone and flesh, like a dying sun hidden beneath stretched skin. At first glance, it looked empty. But then she turned. Faces. The walls were covered in them, not mounted, not painted. Grown. Hundreds of human faces bulged from the surface like tumors, some sleeping, some twitching, some mouthing words without sound, all fused into the wall like they'd been caught mid-scream and frozen in time. Some were smooth and recent. Others had decayed, leaving only patches of muscle or empty eye sockets that wept dark fluid down the stone. And scattered among them, too frequently to ignore, were faces she recognized. Her mother, her father, Claire, herself. Over and over and over. Each face of her own stared at her in a different emotion: terror, rage, sorrow, emptiness. One even grinned, wide and toothless, whispering words she couldn't hear, but instinctively understood: you were always going to end up here. Marla staggered into the center of the room. The floor beneath her flexed underfoot, not quite solid, not quite liquid. Then the light dimmed, and the voices began. They didn't speak all at once. They bled into her, seeping under her skin like ink in water. Each face began to whisper its own version of her truth, a chorus of memory and pain. You wished she would vanish. You liked being the victim. You stayed silent because it made you powerful. You blamed her so you didn't have to blame yourself. The worst part was how familiar they all sounded. Not twisted, not evil, just honest. Like every thought she'd buried in the quietest parts of her brain had been given form and voice. She screamed, covered her ears. The faces laughed. It was not cruel. It was knowing. Then the wall across from her peeled open. Not a door, a mouth again. But this one didn't lead to another room. It led inward, to a hollow chamber. Inside stood a figure. She thought it might be her reflection again. But no, this one breathed, moved, and wept. It was her. Yes. But from the moment after Claire disappeared. The day she lied. The exact version of her who decided silence was safer than truth. This Marla wore the same clothes. Her face was younger, pale, eyes wide with old pain. She didn't move as Marla stepped closer. She was tethered. By threads. Black, brittle ones, leading up into the ceiling and down through the floor. Each thread led to a different face on the wall. Marla understood immediately. This was the version of her the house had kept alive. Nourished. Preserved like a shrine to her cowardice. The original root of all the lies. She reached out to touch her. The figure blinked once, and then whispered, "Please let me go." The threads twitched. The walls screamed. Every face contorted, moaning as if being flayed. The entire room reacted to the idea of release. The house didn't want her to cut the cords. This was the version it needed to exist. The guilt farm. The original sin. And if she severed that, it would all begin to collapse. But Marla didn't hesitate. She pulled a jagged shard of mirror glass from her pocket. The one she'd taken without thinking from the room of silence. A memory in sharp form. She held it to the nearest thread. The house howled, but she sliced it. The thread snapped with a shriek like metal being torn in half. The tethered Marla gasped. Color returned to her cheeks. Marla stepped forward, slicing another, then another. Each one made the room shudder. The faces melted into the wall, one by one, dissolving like wet paint. And then came the final thread, thicker than the others, connected to the grinning Marla on the far wall. The version that liked being broken. The one that enjoyed the attention. The thread pulsed. Alive. She brought the glass down on it. The floor cracked. The light above exploded into darkness, and the younger Marla collapsed into her arms. Empty. Weightless. No longer a prisoner. Just a ghost finally released. The faces were gone now. The room was silent. And for the first time since entering the house, Marla felt something strange relief. Until she heard the voice again. Not hers. Not Claire's. But the one she first heard in the woods. The one that whispered her name the night everything changed. It spoke from behind her. Close enough to touch. You've unburied too much. Now you need to decide who walks out. She turned. There was no one there. But the wall behind her was a mirror again. Not warped. Not cracked. Clear, two versions of her stood reflected. One bruised, bleeding, changed by truth. The other untouched, perfect, innocent. One could leave. The other would stay. The house never let both go. And this time, she had to choose. Because the house had grown tired of choosing for her. The mirror offered no guidance. It simply stood, tall and mute, catching the faint light that bled in from the ceiling's cracks. Marla stared at it, breath short. Her heartbeat no longer sensing with the house, but pulsing erratically in her throat. On the glass, both versions of herself waited, perfectly still. On the left, the broken Marla, bruised, gaunt, face lined with guilt and the weight of survival. On the right, the unmarked version, clean, soft-eyed, untouched by memory, a porcelain lie preserved in amber. The child the world thought she was before the house found her. Behind the mirror, the walls throbbed with a new rhythm, impatience. The house wanted a decision, and this time it would not offer riddles, whispers, or tricks. It demanded a sacrifice. One self must stay, one may leave. Marla took a step forward. The mirror remained cool, indifferent, waiting. The version on the right, the innocent one, smiled faintly, like a photograph posing for an audience that never existed. Her reflection's eyes were glassy, too bright. The kind of eyes you see in people who've never truly been alone with themselves. The version on the left trembled slightly, fingers curled tight, lips pressed thin in concentration. She didn't look noble. She looked tired, worn thin by the weight of remembering, of carrying every room the house forced her to walk through. But her eyes, they were alive, a kind of clarity that only comes from walking through fire and surviving every lie along the way. Marla felt her throat tighten. This wasn't just about choosing who lived. This was choosing which truth became real. The clean version was tempting. If she chose her, she could walk away from this. Start over. No memories of Claire's screams, no understanding of the house's hunger. She could believe again in innocence, in ignorance. But that version was a weapon, a pawn the house could use again. Another vessel that would forget, wander, and eventually return, unaware, unprotected. The broken version, that was someone who knew better now. Someone who had earned her scars. Someone the house would never fool again. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the mirror shard. The same one she'd used to sever the tethers in the previous room. Its edge was still red, still sharp. The mirror in front of her rippled. Both versions of herself tilted their heads, waiting. She placed the shard against the glass and spoke aloud. For every version of me that chose silence, I'm sorry. The house shuddered. The mirror darkened. But this, she pressed the shard harder. This is the version that remembers. She turned to the innocent Marla. Her face didn't change, but her smile cracked just slightly at the corners, revealing the smallest hint of panic. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the glass, lips moving, but no sound came. Then Marla raised the shard and slammed it into the reflection's heart. The mirror howled, not in sound, but with memory. It shattered not with a crash, but a wave of screams, cries, and breathless gasps, as if every reflection the house had ever swallowed was suddenly released in a single exhale. Light spilled through the break, white-hot and immediate, illuminating every crevice of the room. The innocent Marla dissolved, unraveling like thread pulled too fast from cheap fabric. And the broken version stepped through. Marla gasped, now whole again. Every fractured part of her sewn together by choice, not by the house, but by her own hand. The mirror disintegrated behind her, and the walls did something they hadn't done since she'd arrived. They retreated, pulled back, revealed corridors uncoiling like veins, now open to her. The house no longer roared, it whimpered, as if recognizing the one thing it feared: someone who understood it, someone it couldn't lie to. Marla walked forward, and the house no longer shifted to confuse her. The walls stayed where they were. The doors opened without sound. The air grew warmer, no longer thick with decay, but damp like soil ready to grow something new. Then she entered the final hallway. She knew it instinctively, because there were no tricks left, no voices, no riddles, just a straight path. At the end was a door, wooden, old, and marked with two carvings, BGI and NNG on the left, Endang on the right, two knobs, two options. She stepped forward and placed one hand on each. The floor pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of something resigned. She turned the knob labeled ENDNG. It clicked, the door opened. Behind it, nothingness. A black so deep it seemed to pull at her thoughts, unmaking them. She didn't step through. She closed it. Then turned the other. BGNNG. This door creaked open slowly. Behind it light. Not warmth, but clarity. The kind of light that doesn't comfort but exposes. A field. Grass swaying. A single swing set, rusted but still swaying as if someone had just left. A tree she hadn't seen since she was 9. Claire's voice echoing in the distance, laughing. Marla stepped through, and as the door closed behind her, the house whispered one last thing she remembers. But this time, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like defeat. At first, Marla thought the light was real. The air had weight again, not oppressive, but natural, like the thick summer heat that settled over her childhood home just before a storm. The grass beneath her bare feet was damp with dew, bending softly as she walked forward. Wind brushed her cheeks. Birds called from somewhere far off, but it was too perfect, too curated. Every detail felt like it had been handpicked from memory and placed carefully, one blade of grass at a time. And the sun, it didn't warm her skin. It looked right, a soft gold bloom above the field, but its light cast no warmth, no shadow. Marla stopped walking. The swing set was just ahead, exactly where it used to be when she and Claire played every afternoon after school. One of the seats swayed slightly, but there was no breeze. The tree that towered over it was familiar down to the twist in the bark, and the one branch that always dipped too low. She stared up into the leaves and realized they weren't moving. Not even a flutter. They were still. The whole field was holding its breath, and now so was she. She turned slowly, scanning the space. There were no fences, no end to the grass, just horizon stretching in every direction like an oil painting with no brush stroke out of place. It was too quiet, too clean. And then she saw it. The smallest detail, easy to miss unless you were looking. Her footprints didn't stay. Each step she took, the grass sprang back, leaving no mark. As if she had never been there at all. The house wasn't gone. It had just dressed up. Marla moved cautiously toward the swing set. As she reached for one of the chains, her skin recoiled from the cold. Icy. Metal that hadn't felt sunlight in years. She sat. The swing didn't creak. It moved with her like it had been waiting. That's when she heard it. Claire's laughter. Soft at first, floating in from nowhere and everywhere. Marla twisted her neck, scanning the horizon. Claire, she called. No answer. Only more laughter. Familiar. Almost comforting. If not for the absence behind it. The tone was right. The rhythm. But there was no weight. No breath. Like the house had extracted the memory of her sister's laugh and stretched it over something hollow. The swing beside her moved. She hadn't seen it start. Hadn't felt anyone sit. But it moved now. Slowly, back and forth, perfectly in sync with hers. She turned her head and saw Claire, maybe. She looked older now, teenaged, maybe 17, with the same button nose and sharp chin. Her blonde hair was longer than Marla remembered, and her eyes, once warm, were too dark. Too still? Claire smiled. Remember this? She asked, her voice like syrup, thick and just a little too sweet. We used to see who could go the highest. Marla nodded, lips trembling. Yeah, she whispered. You always won. Claire giggled. Only because you were scared to fall. They swayed in silence for a few minutes. Then Claire spoke again. But you fell anyway, didn't you? Marla's hands clenched the chains. That wasn't. Claire cut her off. It wasn't your fault, she asked, tilting her head. Is that what you were going to say? Marla's stomach twisted. No. Claire's smile vanished. For a second, her face shimmered, like heat rising off pavement. Marla blinked. Claire's mouth didn't move, but her voice echoed in the space between them. You still don't know which one of us you saved. Marla stood abruptly. The swing kept moving. Claire didn't look up. You brought me back, Claire said, or something that looked like me. But you never checked, did you? Marla stepped back. No, she whispered. That's not true. You're here, you're real. Claire finally looked up, and her eyes were black, not burned, not empty. Consuming. Nothing in this place is real unless you decide it is, she said. Marla turned to run, but the field was changing. The grass beneath her feet browned in a blink, curling into ash. The sky dimmed. The sun blinked out like a bulb. And ahead of her, the ground split open, revealing the edge of a well, identical to the one in the Chapel of Masks. Except this time, it wasn't filled with water. It was filled with faces. Dozens of them, all hers. Screaming, she backed away. Claire stood behind her now, unmoving. The house never wanted me, Claire said. It wanted you. The girl who lied. The girl who left. The girl who could remember. The field trembled. The swing set collapsed into the earth with a groan. You've walked the halls. Opened the doors. You fed it piece by piece. It doesn't matter who I was. I'm just a shape it wears. Marla shook her head. No. I chose to remember. I faced it. I chose. Claire grinned again. But did you ever choose to forgive? Marla went silent, because the house had never asked for that. Not once. It fed on guilt, yes, but it thrived on withheld forgiveness. The ache, the lingering pain, the wound that never closed. Claire's shape stepped toward her. The mask of her sister began to flicker, revealing glimpses of the thing beneath, not monstrous, not twisted, just empty, a void-wearing memory. If you let go the knot, Claire whispered, it dies. Marla knelt by the well. The faces screamed louder now. One reached up, a younger version of herself. Blood on her palms, voice hoarse from screaming. I'm sorry, Marla whispered. The face quieted. She reached in and touched it. The surface of the well ignited in white light. One by one, the faces vanished. The well began to collapse in on itself, and the false sun above them returned, not bright, not warm, but real. Claire was gone. So was the swing set. So was the field. Now Marla stood in a small, dim room, alone, and in the center a simple door, wood, no carvings, no tricks, only a brass plate above it, newly polished EXIT. But before she could reach for it, the floor behind her whispered, if you leave, you must let go. And for the first time, Marla knew she could, because she wanted to, because she had forgiven the child who ran, the sister who disappeared, the self who stayed behind. She placed her hand on the doorknob, and the house exhaled. Not in defeat, not in warning, but like it was letting go too. Marla's hand hovered on the doorknob, hesitant not out of fear, but something deeper, finality. The metal beneath her palm was warm, human, as if the door itself was alive and waiting to be touched, to be chosen. The word etched above it, EXIT, was simple, unadorned. But that was the deception. The house never made anything simple. Even now, even here, at what felt like the edge of it all, she knew this wouldn't be just a passage out. This would be a test disguised as a release. And if she passed through that door without finishing what the house had begun, it wouldn't just stay behind. It would follow. She turned the knob. The latch clicked. The door swung inward with a quiet creak. No blinding light, no dramatic reveal. Just a small, gray hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and faded photos in cheap wooden frames. The kind of place that didn't announce horror, but kept it hidden in the folds of normalcy. It smelled like dust and old fabric, like the inside of a forgotten coat closet. And yet, as soon as Marla stepped across the threshold, she recognized it instantly. It was the hallway outside her childhood bedroom. Everything was right. The faint crack in the fourth floorboard. The tiny gouge in the wall from when she flung a book in a tantrum. The crooked light switch. She was back. Not in memory, not in mimicry, but exactly back. The house had reconstructed it perfectly. Or perhaps she had never left. Down the hall, the door to Claire's room was ajar. A soft, flickering light leaked from it, casting long shadows that moved even when nothing else did. Marla stood still, pulse quickening. She had been through every room of the house's design, every twisted reflection of her past and pain. But this untouched corner of her real life felt more dangerous than any mirror or maze. Because here, truth couldn't be symbolic. It had to be lived. She walked down the hall. The door creaked open wider on its own. Inside, the room was just as it had been the last day Claire was in it. Posters on the wall. Books stacked neatly on the shelves. The blue and white comforter half draped over the bed. Claire's favorite stuffed rabbit, Whiskers, sat perched on the pillow. Its fur thinned from years of being held. There was no blood here, no bones. No grotesque faceless figures, just memory. Marla stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she saw herself, sitting at the desk in the corner. Not the house's version of her, not a reflection. Her, the girl she used to be, 8 years old, legs swinging, eyes red from crying. She didn't look up when Marlo approached. Didn't blink. Just stared down at the journal open in front of her. Marla leaned in and read over her younger self's shoulder, words scrawled in childish print. Claire's gone, and it's my fault. I didn't mean to leave her. I just wanted the voice to stop. I wanted everything to stop. Marla reached out. The girl flinched. Hey, Marla whispered. It's okay. The child looked up at her then. And for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, Marla saw something she'd never truly allowed herself to face: the fear. The raw, unfiltered terror of a child who made a mistake and didn't know how to fix it. Tears welled in both their eyes at once. I'm sorry, the child said. I didn't know what would happen. Marla knelt. I know. Neither did I, but I think we both paid for it. Enough. The girl nodded. And then, with slow, deliberate movements, she picked up the journal, held it out to Marla, and said, You have to carry it now. Marla took it. The moment her fingers touched the cover, the room began to dissolve. Not collapse, not burn, just fade, like fog lifting. The furniture melted into light. The walls peeled into sky. And then she was standing outside the house on Calypso Lane. The real house, still cracked and rotted, windows dark, door shut tight. Except now it was silent. Dead. The hunger was gone. The house had nothing left to feed on, because she had taken it back. Every memory, every truth, every lie. She looked down at the journal still in her hands. Her handwriting had changed. The pages were blank, waiting. A voice stirred behind her. Soft. Claire, are you okay? She asked. Marla turned. Her sister stood in the road, barefoot, dressed in the clothes she wore the day she vanished, but her face, her eyes were clear, alive. Yeah, Marla said. I think I finally am. Claire smiled. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just stood there, together, in silence. And for the first time in years, that silence was kind. Not heavy. Not waiting. Just still. Then Claire pointed to the journal. You gonna write it down? Marla nodded. Yeah, but this time, I won't forget it. She looked back at the house one final time. It watched her, but not with menace, with recognition. A shared look between something that had done its job and someone who had survived it. Then Marla turned and walked away. No loop, no trick, no twisted road back. The exit this time was real, because she remembered, because she chose, because the house could only hold the version of her that refused to see, and that girl was gone. Days passed, or at least, Marla told herself they did. Out in the real world, whatever counted for real anymore, time resumed its rhythm, steady and indifferent. She found herself back in motion, eating again, sleeping fitfully, breathing fresh air that didn't carry whispers. The sky had depth. The ground didn't pulse. The house on Calypso Lane remained behind her, inert and slouched like a predator that had finally gone still after feeding. She'd passed it once more, just to be sure. The windows were empty. The wood, though rotted, looked less alive. There was no pull anymore, no hunger. Only an echo. And yet something had followed her. Not in the traditional way. There were no phantom footsteps behind her, no flickers in the mirror, no shadows stretching too long in the lamplight. But she felt it. Inside. A slow turn of something she couldn't name. The way the hairs on her arm would rise when she passed certain doorways. The way her phone would light up with notifications she hadn't received. Once, while walking through a grocery store, a child stared at her for a long time, eyes wide, unmoving. Before whispering, "I saw you in the walls." She dropped her basket and left without looking back. The journal remained blank. It sat beside her bed like a sealed confession box, demanding attention but refusing to speak first. Every time she opened it, she expected the pages to fill themselves with ink from another world, for the house's voice to bleed through the margins. But they didn't. The paper stayed white. Waiting, not passive, not benign, just expectant. She hadn't written a word, because she didn't know what to say. How do you record something that rewrote you? How do you explain a place that mirrored your guilt so perfectly it knew what you'd done before you could admit it? Marla traced her fingers over the leather cover, wondering what would happen if she simply tore it up, burned it, buried it. But even as the thought came, she heard the house's final whisper echo through her memory like breath against glass. If you leave, you must let go. She hadn't. Not fully. Not yet. That night, the dream came back, not in fragments like before. Whole. Sharp. She was in the hallway again. The real one. The one that came after the confession room, after the field of false light. But this time, she wasn't walking it alone. She was watching herself walk it, from behind, from above, as if she were something else now, something separate. In the dream, her body moved slowly, each step weighed with invisible chains. The hallway extended farther than it ever had. The doors lining it were gone. Instead, each space on the wall was filled with mirrors. Dozens, hundreds, every single one showing a different version of her. But in every mirror, she was being followed by Claire, or what she thought was Claire. But Marla knew now it wasn't just her sister. It was the moment, the decision. The second she turned her back, the second she let silence win. That moment had become a thing with teeth, a shape that lived behind mirrors, in the folds of her thoughts, waiting to be named. And in the dream, it reached for her shoulder, just barely touched her skin, and she woke, not in her bed, on the floor, the journal open beside her, one page written, but not in her handwriting. The script was thin, angular, identical to the names carved into the drawers in the keeper's room. It read, "You left," but she didn't. Her skin crawled. She slammed the book shut and threw it across the room. But when she turned back to her bed, it was there again. Resting neatly on the pillow, open to that same page. Waiting, she tried to ignore it. Days passed. She silenced her phone, stopped answering emails, let messages pile up until their notifications became meaningless numbers. But the dreams continued. They were subtle at first. A single stairwell in a familiar building that stretched one floor too far. A doorway that appeared in a friend's home, just for a moment. A woman at a cafe who stared too long, blinking with eyes stitched shut. Then the real world began to bend. Not violently, politely. Her bathroom mirror rippled once while she brushed her teeth. Her reflection paused mid-movement, just for a breath. When she reached for the faucet, her reflection didn't. That was the moment she accepted it. The house didn't let go. It waited, not with impatience, not with malice, but certainty. It had tasted her guilt. It had been fed, and now it knew her too well to forget. Marla sat with the journal again. This time, she wrote, "If she didn't leave, where is she now?" The moment her pen left the page, the light above her flickered. The air grew cold. The scent of damp earth returned, thick and unmistakable. She looked up, and across the room, standing just beyond the doorway to her hall, was Claire. Not a ghost, not a twisted version, just Claire, still 13, still barefoot, still waiting. And Marla realized what the journal truly was. Not a record, not a curse, a door. The real exit wasn't the one she had stepped through. It was the one she had to write. Every memory, every truth. Every part of Claire that was still in her. She had taken the house's hunger into herself. And now she had to feed it with honesty, not fear. Or it would come back. And next time it wouldn't ask permission. The journal sat on her lap like a sleeping thing. Its weight had changed. Heavier. Denser, as if the paper inside had been swapped for stone. Marla stared at the page she'd just written on, the ink still glistening as though unwilling to dry. If she didn't leave, where is she now? The question echoed louder than she intended. Not in sound, but in presence. As if the act of writing it down had summoned something into the room. And it had. Claire stood in the hallway, exactly where the light met the shadow, her form outlined like a chalk drawing before a storm could wash it away. She wasn't moving. She wasn't blinking. She simply was. Marla's breath snagged in her throat, torn between terror and something far worse. Hope. Because Claire didn't look like a monster. She didn't look like a ghost. She looked like Marla's guilt, dressed in her sister's skin. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Claire tilted her head, just slightly, and pointed at the journal. "You stopped writing," she said. Her voice was low, clear, with none of the distortion the house usually smeared across its imitations. Marla blinked. Claire took one step closer. The light didn't touch her. It bent away from her like it was afraid. "You said you forgave," Claire continued. "But you left a page blank." The journal grew warm in Marla's hands. Pages began to turn on their own, fast, blurring. A whirlwind of white and ink, each one marked with her handwriting. Notes, confessions, memories, lies she'd told herself through the years. They spun until they stopped on a page near the center. One she didn't remember writing. There, in delicate black ink, was a sentence, "She's still in the room." And beneath it, smaller, "You brought her out, but not with you." Marla stared at it. "What room?" she whispered. Claire smiled softly, the way she used to when she beat Marla at board games and tried not to rub it in. "You know," Marla did. Of course she did. The room where she made the choice, where she severed the last thread, where she stood before the mirror and decided which version of herself could leave. She hadn't saved Claire. She had chosen herself, and the house had never claimed Claire. Not directly. It had absorbed her pain, her absence, her final scream, and tucked it into the deepest part of its structure, like a child locking something shameful in a drawer. Claire stepped closer. "You left her there, the one who waited, the one who believed you'd come back." Marla's hands shook. The journal pulsed. Pages fluttered again. This time, the writing wasn't hers. It was the house's. Sentences written in twisted loops and foreign characters that somehow she still understood. Truth is not escape. Truth is the key. But keys open more than one door. Another line below, you must return. One last room. And beneath that, almost invisible, the room that remembers for you. The hallway light dimmed. Claire began to vanish, flickering like a bad signal. You know where it is, she whispered. You always have. And then she was gone. Not with a sound, not with a gust of air, just erased, like someone had wiped her away with a damp cloth. Marla stood up. The journal closed itself. It was light again now, nearly featherweight. But she could feel the room pulling, a directionless gravity, not back to Calypso Lane, not physically, inward. The door at the far end of her apartment hallway was closed. It had always been a closet, but now it felt like more. She walked to it slowly, feet cold on the floor, heart climbing toward her throat. She opened it, darkness inside, deeper than it should have been, much deeper. And then came the sound. Not a growl, not a scream, just a slow, shuddering breath. And the unmistakable voice of her childhood self, barely a whisper, you left me in here. Marla stepped forward. The closet grew, expanded, walls falling away, replaced by the familiar curve of an endless corridor. She was back. Not in the house, but in the part of herself the house had never truly released. It had given her a door, yes, but not freedom, and now it wanted to finish the story. The journal was open again. The pages blank, the pen in her hand. Ahead of her, in the distance, was a single room lit by a single candle. The door stood open. The final chapter hadn't been written yet, but it would be. By her, or by the house. The hallway stretched ahead like a vein, pulsing gently beneath her feet. Marla walked without thinking now. The journal tucked under one arm, the pen clutched tight in her hand. The corridor was familiar in the way old wounds are, dull in their ache, but always threatening to split open again. This wasn't the house as she remembered it. Not the one with whispering stairwells and mouth-shaped doors. No, this place was quieter, more deliberate. It didn't need to scare her anymore. It had her attention. The door at the end was narrow, curved at the top, made from a material she couldn't name. Something not quite wood, not quite flesh. The candlelight spilling from inside flickered with an unnatural rhythm, as if the flame were sensing itself to her heartbeat. She paused in the doorway. The room was small, circular. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with drawers, identical to the ones the keeper once filed away names in, but these didn't bear labels, no initials, no numbers, just smooth, featureless panels, all closed, all waiting. In the center of the room was a table. On it, a single item, a reel-to-reel recorder. The reels were already turning, but there was no sound. Marla stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the door behind her sealed shut without a sound. The candlelight grew steadier, more intentional. She walked toward the recorder, heart tapping against her ribs like it wanted out. A small chair stood beside the table, low and wooden, like something from a schoolroom. She sat, unsure whether it was her choice or the room's. The journal opened in her lap. A blank page stared back at her. The pen lifted on its own and hovered just above the page, waiting for her hand to find it. She reached. The reels clicked once. Then the voice began to play. Not hers, Claire's. Not twisted or hollow, not echoed through nightmare. Just her voice, as it had been before the house, before the woods, before the forgetting. She was reading. Once upon a time, there were two sisters, one brave, one careful, one who stayed, one who ran. Marla's breath caught. Claire's voice continued. They loved each other, but fear has sharp teeth, and when fear bit one sister blood, the other ran. The reels turned slowly. The one who blood waited. She believed. She whispered through the walls. But the house is deep, and even faith drowns eventually. Marla stared down at the journal. Her hand moved. She didn't force it. The words came on their own. I left her. I didn't look back. I told myself I would return, but I never did. The recorder continued. Now the voice was hers. One of the recordings the house had taken from her. She heard herself screaming Claire's name in the woods, heard her begging no one in particular to take it back. Then silence. Then laughter. Not hers. The house's. Mocking. Reliving. Feeding. The reels began to slow. Claire's voice returned, softer now. You carried me out. But you didn't carry the moment. You left it here. Marla understood. This wasn't just about her choices. It was about the hour they happened, the second she turned her back, the moment she decided that forgetting was easier than living with truth. The house had kept it, preserved it, not to torture her, but because that one moment was what gave it life. The journal trembled in her lap. The candle's flame flared. The pen scratched harder now. New words took shape, not from her, but from the room itself. One may leave. One must stay. Marla shook her head. No, she whispered. Not again. But the drawer directly across from her creaked open. Inside was a single object, a photo. Old, grainy, black and white. Two girls on a swing set. Claire and Marla, frozen in mid-laugh. But something was behind them in the photo. Not fully visible. A shape, indistinct in watching. Marla's fingers hovered over it. She picked it up, turned it over. Words were scrawled in the familiar thin, curling hand she'd seen in the guest book and drawers alike. One of you is still here. The light dimmed. The reels stopped. The drawer slammed shut. Another opened. Then another. The walls came alive with them, sliding open, one after the next, revealing objects from her past, a cracked CD player, a mud-stained backpack, a pair of shoes she forgot she'd buried in the woods after that day. Memories she never gave the house willingly, but it had always known, always remembered, because that was the final secret of the house. It didn't haunt, it didn't punish, it remembered for you, the guilt you tried to forget, the pain you locked away, the second you lied, even if only to yourself. It preserved it, curated it, and eventually, it brought you back. Marla stood slowly. The journal was full now, every page inked, every memory reclaimed. The pen stopped moving. The candle dimmed to a thread. The door behind her creaked open again. No threat this time, no whisper. Just an opening. But she hesitated, because she finally understood the last horror. There had never been a way out, only a way through. And even now, as she stepped toward the light, the house was still watching, not out of malice, but because it had done its job. And like any good archive, it would remain long after the visitor had left. The door behind her whispered closed with a hush too intimate to be mere wind, and the hallway she stepped into was neither familiar nor foreign. It was prepared. A perfect blend of every corridor the house had ever shown her. The wallpaper was a muted version of her childhood home's floral pattern. The light fixtures buzzed like those in her first apartment. Even the scent in the air, burned toast, lavender, damp pine, was unmistakably hers. Every detail said the same thing: this is yours now. Marla walked slowly, the journal cradled in her arms like an offering. The silence was total. No whispers, no clicks, no breathing behind the walls. Just a steady hum of presence. Not absence. Awareness. She didn't need a guide anymore. The house wasn't testing her now. It was watching her leave. But with each step she took, a tension built. Not resistance, not fear, but pressure. Like something vast and ancient holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. The hallway curved gently, impossibly, spiraling in a way that didn't match the laws of space. She should have been walking in circles. But the light ahead grew brighter, closer. Not the amber of the candle, not the cold clarity of dreamlight. This was daylight, true daylight, morning light. And then she saw it. The final door. It stood alone, white, wood chipped with age. The brass handle gleamed. No carvings, no riddles, just a peephole. A single glass eye. It blinked. Marla froze. The eye didn't resemble any human's. It was too round, too fluid, as if the glass itself had skin. It blinked again, slowly, deliberately, then dilated. Behind it, shadows shifted. Something leaned forward on the other side. She should have been terrified. But she wasn't, because now she understood what the eye was. It wasn't there to spy on her. It was hers, her final mirror. One last truth looking back at her. She stepped forward and placed the journal at the base of the door. The eye widened, its pupil adjusted. She felt her own heartbeat slow, not with fear, but with release. Everything she had remembered, everything she had confessed, was inside that book. The pages were soaked with the ink of her past. The screams, the silence, the choices, the ghosts. All of it. It was hers now, not the house's. And by offering it, she wasn't surrendering. She was setting it down. A voice came through the peephole, not spoken, not heard, but understood. "Are you sure?" She didn't answer. She just nodded. The eye blinked once, and the door unlatched. It swung open onto a quiet street. Not a dream, not a memory. Now, morning mist curled along the sidewalk. Leaves stirred in the breeze. Cars moved. Birds chirped. Life. Behind her, the hallway remained dark, still. As she stepped forward, the threshold felt heavy, thick with meaning, like pushing through water. Once she crossed, she knew there would be no going back. Not because the house would forbid her, but because she wouldn't need to. She turned back one last time. The door was still open, but the eye had closed. Not sleeping, just done. The way an old story shuts when it's been told properly. And then, with a slow groan of finality, the door disappeared, not slammed, not sealed, just gone. The sidewalk beneath her feet felt real, the sun on her skin warming. A breeze stirred her hair. Somewhere nearby someone laughed. A dog barked. The world had not changed, but she had. She still carried the memory. The knowledge of what she saw, what she endured, what she left behind. But it no longer hunted her. Because the house had only ever been a mirror, a reflection carved from fear and shame and silence. And she had faced it, not with fire, but with truth. The eye blinked last, but it blinked with her permission. At first, everything felt hollow, not in a dead way, just empty. A stillness too complete, like standing in a theater long after the curtain falls. Marla walked the familiar sidewalks of her town, the same ones she'd once crossed with her head down and her thoughts locked tight behind her teeth. Now, the silence wasn't from fear, but from peace. That should have been a comfort. Instead, it left her disoriented. It was like surviving a long illness. You forget what it's like to breathe without pain, and when you finally do, it feels foreign, undeserved. She passed by the coffee shop she used to visit. The chairs were still mismatched. The same chalkboard menu leaned against the brick wall. A man laughed too loudly from one of the tables outside, and for a moment she stared at him, wondering how the world could be exactly the same after everything she'd been through. People moved around her like she was invisible, but not in the ghostly, menacing way she'd felt inside the house. This was different. She was no longer stitched into their world the way she once had been. Not less real, but more aware, as if the veil that separated thought from experience had thinned. She sat on a bench across from the library, journal in her lap, closed. She hadn't opened it since leaving the house. She wasn't sure she needed to. All the pages were filled now. Nothing more to add, no more confessions to spill. But it called to her. Not with hunger, not with threat, but curiosity. The way an old friend asks for a walk, just to remember the rhythm of your voice. Marla traced the spine with her thumb. Something inside the journal shifted. She opened it. One page had appeared after the last one she'd written. It was clean except for a single sentence: "She still walks the rooms." Her breath hitched. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Because there had always been more than one girl left behind in that place. The house didn't just take her truth. It had others, and not all of them would find their exit. Not all of them would write their way free. The house would wait. It always waited. She looked up at the clouds overhead, remembering every turn of the house's halls, every door that had opened too easily, every wall that had closed behind her like a lung collapsing. She remembered the other names in the drawers, the guest book full of trembling script, the voices in the masks. They were real, all of them. Others had come before her, others had made their choices, and some had been forgotten completely. She couldn't let that be the end. Not now. Marla closed the journal gently and slid it into her bag. Then she stood. She didn't return home. Instead, she walked 2 blocks north, into the oldest part of the neighborhood, the section where the trees grew too tall and the houses hunched together like whispering strangers. There, on a crumbling brick wall, was a bulletin board where people posted everything from missing pet flyers to handmade concert announcements. She reached into her bag, pulled out a pen and paper, and wrote, "Have you been to the house on Calypso Lane? Do you remember what you shouldn't? You're not alone." She tacked the note onto the board, her hands steady. Beneath the message, she added only this: "We survived. No name, no number. Just a statement." Because the house didn't care about names, only the silence behind them. As she stepped back and looked at the note, the wind picked up. A breeze stirred the corner of the paper. Behind her, a car passed. A dog barked. And somewhere, maybe far, maybe closer than she dared to think, a door creaked open. Not for her, but for someone else. Someone waking in the night with memories they were told they imagined. Someone who looked too long in a mirror and saw a face blink back that wasn't quite their own. Someone the house had already begun to remember. Marla turned and walked away, not to forget, but to watch, to wait, to listen, because the house was still out there, and sooner or later, someone else would find its door. And maybe, just maybe, they would need someone to believe them when they walked back out. Weeks drifted past, like shallow waves lapping at Marla's feet, each one gentle enough to almost convince her that peace had truly returned. Life around her resumed its ordinary pace. Friends inviting her to dinner, neighbors waving as she walked by, sunlight spilling across cafe tables. But something had changed inside her, a quiet echo that lingered at the edge of her perception. Her sleep remained restless, filled not with nightmares, but whispers, soft, half-heard conversations as if carried by wind through cracked windows. One afternoon, sitting in the park beneath an old oak tree, Marla pulled out the journal again. It had become a ritual, opening it each day to confirm nothing new had appeared, reassuring herself that the pages remained exactly as she'd left them. Today was different. When she flipped open the cover, another hand had written on the very first page. The words were tiny, precise, written carefully as if by a frightened child. "I can hear you. Can you hear me?" Marla's heart quickened, her skin prickling with sudden alertness. She glanced around the park, irrationally expecting someone to be watching. There was no one nearby, just the hum of distant traffic and birds chirping from branches overhead. She stared at the words again, traced them with her fingertip, feeling the slight indentations pressed into the paper. These words hadn't come from memory. They felt immediate, raw, present. She took a pen from her bag, fingers trembling slightly, and wrote beneath the new words, "Yes, I can hear you. Where are you?" She waited, barely breathing, the pen poised above the page. Seconds stretched, filled with the gentle rustle of leaves. Then, slowly, ink began to appear beneath her response. Not from any visible pen, but forming gradually, like water seeping through fabric still inside. "It won't let me go. It says I belong here now." Marla felt a chill spread across her skin. This was not memory speaking. It was someone trapped inside the house, reaching through the thin boundary she had unwittingly crossed. Someone still held within the endless rooms, calling out through whatever doorway the journal had become. She wrote quickly, "Who are you?" The response was slower this time, hesitant, ink bleeding faintly onto the page. "They took my name. Can't remember." Just the house now. Marla's heart sank. She knew this feeling intimately. The slow erosion of self, the hollowing out of identity by rooms that fed on guilt and secrets. She hesitated only briefly before responding again. Listen carefully. You have to keep talking. If you remember anything at all, write it down. It helps. Don't let the house write your story. For a long moment, nothing appeared. Marla wondered if she'd lost the connection, if whatever thread had briefly tied them together had frayed. Then, very faintly, words surfaced again. Thinner this time, more desperate. Will it ever stop? Will it ever let go? Marla took a deep breath, steadying herself before answering truthfully. Knowing lies wouldn't survive in this place, only when you do. You must tell it everything. Even the parts you don't want to remember, especially those. The journal's surface shuddered subtly in her hand, the pages trembling as if reacting to her words. She waited, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the blank space beneath her response. Then, finally, the tiniest of scripts emerged. I don't know how to start. Marla wrote back immediately. Start with the door. How did you find it? As she watched, the words hesitated, then poured forth, messy and hurried, like someone finally allowed to speak after long silence. I was running away. I just wanted to disappear. The door was open, waiting. It knew my name. It whispered, and I stepped inside. I've been here ever since. I don't know how long. Time doesn't work right. It loops. It repeats. Marla's fingers tightened around the pen, dread pooling in her chest. She'd seen this, lived it. The timelessness, the repetition, the way the house twisted reality to feed its need for truth and pain. She wrote back steadily, firmly. You must break the loop. Write down the truth. Say it aloud if you can. The house feeds on your silence. Break it. The response was immediate, letters jagged and desperate now. I'm afraid. The house is listening. It's angry now. Marla shivered. The journal felt suddenly heavier, colder, like it might rip from her grasp and close itself forever. Quickly, urgently, she wrote one final line. It can't hold you if you don't let it. Speak. Remember? Right. I'll keep listening. She closed the journal sharply, breathing hard, her pulse loud in her ears. Around her, the park seemed too normal, too bright, disconnected from the quiet terror, unfolding within the pages she now held. She knew this wouldn't end here. The house was still alive, still feeding on stories left incomplete. It hadn't forgotten her. Nor had it forgotten anyone else who'd passed through its door. Marla stood slowly, tucking the journal tightly under her arm. As she began walking home, she felt it, a quiet, insistent tug, as if invisible threads still bound her to Calypso Lane. It wasn't over. Not for her. Not for anyone else caught in its grasp. The house's whispers hadn't ceased. They'd merely shifted focus. Now she was part of its fabric, a listener, a witness. And perhaps, she realized with a jolt of clarity, the only hope for those still trapped inside. Marla kept the journal close, not just out of caution, but from necessity, a strange, half-formed sense that to lose sight of it now would mean losing herself again. It became a constant presence, resting beside her bed each night, nestled in her bag during the day, always near enough to touch. For days, no new words appeared, though she checked obsessively, flipping quickly through pages filled with her own confessions and the desperate plea from the unknown voice still trapped in the house. She could feel the presence on the other side waiting, hesitating, as though gathering courage. Late one evening, as she sat curled in the window seat of her apartment, rain tracing patterns down the glass, the journal vibrated softly against her leg. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she opened the cover to the next blank page, watching as words slowly emerged from the whiteness. Faint as if reluctant to be seen, the house showed me something new tonight. It was you. Marla felt her chest tighten. Her breath caught halfway between curiosity and dread. She wrote back quickly, letters shaky but determined. What did it show you? The journal seemed to shudder, pages shifting subtly beneath her fingers. When the words came, they were hesitant. Ink trembling on the page, rooms you left behind. Doors you never opened. Parts of yourself you don't even know you lost. Marla's grip tightened around the pen, knuckles white as she stared down at the ink bleeding slowly into the page. She wrote hurriedly, described them. Every detail you can remember. Silence stretched, punctuated only by the steady tap of rain. Then words emerged carefully, each letter forming as though reluctantly peeled from shadow. There was a door, gray wood, scratched deeply. It had your name carved into it, over and over. I opened it. Inside was a mirror, but it didn't reflect me. It reflected you. Except your eyes were closed, soon shut. The room kept whispering. It said, she hasn't seen this yet. Marla's heartbeat thundered, her palms sweating. She knew, instinctively, that this was no mere threat, but something more profound. Another layer, another hidden truth the house had kept buried, even from her. Her pen shook slightly as she responded, "Where is this room?" The answer formed slowly, letters hesitant, almost fearful, deepest part. Beneath everything. The last place it shows you before. The sentence trailed off, incomplete. Marla urged the pen across the page. Before what? The ink darkened, bleeding harshly through paper. Before it keeps you forever. Marla set the journal aside, hands trembling. Outside, rain pelted harder, as though the weather itself had heard her fear. She knew the house hadn't simply let her go. It had kept a part of her. A piece hidden so carefully she hadn't even known it was gone. Now, it was showing others, using her image as a warning, or maybe as bait. She stared down at the pages again, heart heavy with dread. Beneath the last message, words formed one more time. It wants you to come back. It wants to finish the story you didn't tell. Marla knew the words were true as she read them. She felt it deep in her bones. A pull like gravity. Inevitable, unavoidable. The house didn't accept unfinished stories. It craved completion, closure. Not just hers, but every soul who stepped through its doors. She picked up the pen one last time, steadying her breath as she wrote firmly, "Then tell it I'll come. Tell it I'll finish the story, but only if it lets you out first." The journal lay still, the ink frozen, suspended as if in silent shock. The response, when it appeared, was sharp, heavy, final. It says yes. But it lies. Marla's chest tightened. The house didn't need to lie. It needed only to promise. Promises were hooks, and she'd already bitten. But she wouldn't enter blind this time. She would return not as prey, but as something more dangerous. A storyteller who knew every secret, who had learned every twist in its endless corridors. Closing the journal carefully, she tucked it into her bag and stood. She had preparations to make, loose ends to tie. The house might think it held the upper hand. But it had forgotten one crucial detail. Stories don't just belong to the ones who write them down. They belong to those who remember them, those who tell them again and again, until they become stronger than silence. Marla stepped toward the door, determined, rain still tapping rhythmically against the glass behind her. The journal pulsed once more in her bag, quietly, like a heartbeat, a reminder that this page, this chapter, was far from closed, and the house on Calypso Lane waited patiently, confident, believing she was returning as its prisoner. But this time, she knew better. This time, she was returning to reclaim herself, and anyone else still trapped inside. The street looked impossibly normal beneath the pale gray sky. Marla paused at the corner, gazing down Calypso Lane, as if it were a river she had to cross. The old houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their roofs uneven, their shutters crooked, and yet nothing about them appeared menacing. On the surface, everything was exactly as it should be, familiar, ordinary. It was a trick she'd fallen for before. The kind of lie that relied on simplicity and nostalgia, masking what lay just beyond the threshold. The house sat waiting halfway down the block, squat and silent, its windows dull like the eyes of something sleeping with one eye open. Marla's heart tapped erratically against her ribs as she took the first step forward, each footfall feeling heavier. As if gravity itself tried to hold her back, the closer she drew, the more pronounced the details became, paint chipped away like old skin, the porch sagging slightly to one side, a few boards warped by rain and neglect. But none of these superficial flaws matched the ruin she knew existed inside. That decay was far deeper, etched in memory and silence, in forgotten whispers and half-lit rooms where secrets lay buried beneath floorboards that breathed. She tightened her grip on the journal, feeling the faint pulse of the pages against her palm, reassuring her she was not entirely alone. As she approached the steps, the front door drifted open slowly, creaking softly on its hinges as though welcoming an old friend. The air inside felt heavy, warm, smelling faintly of dust and mildew. A soft whisper echoed from somewhere deep within, barely audible, but unmistakable in its greeting, "Welcome back." Marla crossed the threshold without hesitation, her eyes adjusting slowly to the dimness. The door swung shut behind her with a gentle click, sealing her once more inside the house's careful, patient embrace. It felt different now, not less dangerous, but more deliberate, aware of her knowledge and yet utterly unconcerned by it. She stepped carefully down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the faded carpet. The walls shifted subtly in her peripheral vision, the floral wallpaper blurring into shapes she chose not to examine too closely. She had learned that the house fed on focus, growing stronger when it held your gaze. At the far end of the hall stood a familiar staircase winding upward into shadows. She knew it was her next step, the path she had no choice but to follow. As her foot touched the first stair, she felt the house tremble slightly beneath her weight, a subtle acknowledgement that it recognized her return, not with anger, but satisfaction. At the top, the hallway stretched endlessly, a corridor that twisted back upon itself like the spine of a sleeping serpent. Doors lined the walls, some ajar, others closed, each radiating its own silent pull. But Marla didn't pause or glance through them. She knew exactly which door she needed, knew the shape of its knob, the creak of its hinges, the room that lay behind it, unfinished, unspoken, and still waiting for her to remember. She reached the door marked only by scratches and her own faded initials, a faint tremor passing through her fingertips as she twisted the handle and pushed it open. Inside was the gray room she'd heard described, the mirror standing tall at its center. It was cracked now, lines spiderwebbing outward, splintering her reflection into shards of fractured memory. Marla stepped closer, staring at her reflection, eyes stitched shut, mouth slightly open. Skin pale and paper, thin as though she'd been drained of life by the years spent here. She placed a hand against the mirror's cold surface, feeling it pulse faintly beneath her touch. "You kept a piece of me," she whispered, her voice calm despite the unease crawling up her spine. The reflection smiled slowly, stitching pulling at the corners of its mouth. "You gave it freely," it replied softly, its voice a perfect mimic of her own. "All of you do. You come in pieces, scattered by guilt and fear. The house simply keeps what you discard." Marla pressed harder against the glass. "Then let me have it back." Her reflection tilted its head curiously. "You think it's that simple? You left it behind. Forgotten things grow here, change, become their own truths." "I remember now," Marla insisted. "It belongs to me." Her reflection's smile widened, the stitches stretching grotesquely. "Memory isn't enough. Truth must be accepted, not reclaimed." Marla opened the journal, laying it open on the small table beside the mirror. "Then take mine," she said firmly. "All of it. The truths you need are here." The room seemed to draw a sharp breath, walls tightening, floor rippling gently beneath her feet. The mirror cracked further, glass splinters cascading downward, leaving empty spaces where her reflection had stood. From behind the shards, a figure emerged, small, thin, familiar. Claire stepped forward slowly, her eyes wide and questioning. "Marla." Marla's throat tightened painfully. I'm sorry, she said softly. I left you behind. I ran when I should have stayed. That was the truth I could never face. Claire reached out tentatively, fingers trembling. Marla took her hand firmly. Feeling the coldness of her sister's skin, the slight pulse of something not entirely alive, but no longer trapped. Behind them, the mirror continued to crumble, walls shifting, floorboards groaning softly. The room was losing its hold. Claire looked at Marla, eyes shining with tears. It wants you now. It wants to keep you instead. Marla squeezed her sister's hand tighter. It can only keep what I give it, and I'm not giving it anything else. She turned to face the room, voice steady, strong enough to echo clearly through the walls. You've taken enough. The story is done. I am finished running, finished hiding. Now let her go. The house trembled deeply, its structure sighing, relaxing, pulling inward as though accepting her words. Claire's hand grew warmer, solidifying beneath her touch. The room's edges blurred softly, dissolving into light, leaving only the two of them standing hand in hand amidst the fading ruin. Slowly, carefully, the room released its hold, doors opening silently down the hallway, each one inviting an exit, a path out. Marla stepped forward, Claire beside her. Feeling the weight of her sister's presence grounding her, anchoring her to this moment, to reality, to the life she'd nearly abandoned. Behind them, the house whispered softly, a final breath, acknowledging defeat, or perhaps simply acceptance. Truth remembered is truth freed. Together, Marla and Claire walked toward the open door, their shadows blending into one, stepping firmly back into the world beyond the house that had once claimed them both. Freedom wasn't the rush Marla had expected. There was no triumphant sunrise, no dramatic thunderclap marking the moment of release. Instead, there was just the quiet crunch of gravel beneath their feet as she and Claire stepped away from the crumbling threshold of the house on Calypso Lane. The air was cool, thick with early morning damp, and the fog curled low around their ankles like a pet reluctant to let them go. The door behind them didn't slam. It simply faded. One moment it stood there, weather-beaten, swollen with secrets, and the next it was gone, replaced by a cracked concrete wall and a row of overgrown hedges. Claire held Marla's hand tight, her grip no longer cold, no longer fading. She was real now, her skin warm, her eyes alert, but she said nothing. Neither did Marla, not at first. There were too many words, too much weight. They walked side by side in silence, the kind that only exists between people who have survived the same nightmare. The street stretched ahead, indistinct and strange despite its familiarity. Something had shifted in the world around them, something subtle and unfinished. Back at Marla's apartment, the quiet continued. She made tea without asking Claire if she wanted any. Claire sat on the couch, staring at nothing, her eyes moving as if following invisible threads. Marla poured hot water over the bag, watching the steam curl up like smoke signals no one could read. The moment the mug was in her hands, she asked what had been clawing at her since they left the house. "How long were you in there?" Claire blinked slowly, as though the question had dragged her out of a deep sleep. "I don't know," she murmured. "Time doesn't move right in there. Sometimes I'd blink and a week was gone. Other times, it felt like years passed in an hour." Marla sat across from her, sipping the bitter tea. "Do you remember everything now?" Claire hesitated. "Most of it. Enough. There are gaps. Rooms I think I was in but can't describe. Voices I heard but never saw the mouths. And always that sound." Marla's chest tightened. "What sound?" Claire looked directly at her. "Writing. Constant. As if someone was sitting just out of sight, scribbling everything I thought before I even said it." Marla felt the journal shift slightly in her bag from where she'd set it on the floor. It hadn't written anything new since they left. But she hadn't opened it either. She reached down slowly, lifted it, and placed it between them on the coffee table. Claire eyed it like it might bite. "That's how you got out," Marla said. "Through words." through truth. The house needed the story to finish. Claire nodded, but her expression didn't ease. But what if it wasn't finished? Marla frowned. We left. It let us go. Did it? Claire asked softly. Or did it just turn the page? The journal vibrated once beneath their gaze. Just a twitch, a breath. Marla opened it slowly. The pages were blank, all of them. Every word she'd written, every confession, every plea gone, erased. Claire's eyes widened. It's starting over. No, Marla said firmly, though her voice shook. It's not. This story's done. But deep down, she wasn't sure, because she remembered what the house had told her. In the very first room, truth must be remembered, or it returns. And suddenly, she realized the weight in her chest wasn't just relief or grief. It was something else. Something following. Not physically, not visible, but present. Like a thread trailing behind them, still connected to something deep inside those walls. Marla slammed the journal shut. Claire jumped slightly. We bury it, Marla said. Somewhere it can't find its way back. You think that will stop it? Claire asked, voice thin. You think it won't just find someone else? Marla stood, took a deep breath. Maybe it will. Maybe that's what it does. But if we keep it, if we feed it with fear, then it wins. Claire nodded slowly, hesitantly. Okay. They drove for hours. Through back roads, across bridges, past towns neither of them had ever visited. Until they found a place so empty it barely felt real. A stretch of woods off an abandoned lot, surrounded by rusting signs and leaf-choked ditches. There, beneath the tangled roots of a twisted oak, they dug a shallow grave and placed the journal inside. Marla hesitated only once before covering it with dirt, pressing her palms flat over the mound like sealing a wound. Neither of them said anything on the drive home. But that night, as they tried to sleep in the same room for the first time in years, Claire sat upright in the dark and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Marla turned to look at her. Claire's eyes were wide again. Marla strained her ears. Nothing. But beneath that silence, deep and soft like ink soaking into old paper, she almost thought she could hear it too. A pen, scratching across a page. Far away, but getting closer. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the comforting way. Silence had taken on a new shape, thicker, heavier, threaded with tension like it was stretched too thin and might snap with the wrong breath. Marla went about her routines, made tea in the mornings, walked around the block with Claire in the evenings, tried to convince herself that normal could grow again in the burned soil of everything they'd endured. But even as the world outside moved on, something inside their shared space shifted. Subtle things, small at first, but undeniable once noticed. The lights flickered, sometimes just once, sometimes enough to make Claire freeze in place mid-step, her eyes darting to corners as if expecting them to fold inward. Faucets turned on for a second, then stopped as if remembering they weren't supposed to be running. The television would buzz with static for a heartbeat and return to normal, too fast to blame it on anything she could name. Marla didn't mention these things to Claire, and Claire didn't mention them to her. But both of them knew. The house hadn't let go. It had just grown quieter, patient. One evening, as dusk melted into a dense gray twilight, Marla sat on the edge of her bed with her journal, the new one. Blank pages, fresh binding, no trace of the one they had buried. She hadn't written in it yet. Every time she tried, her hand froze. She no longer trusted the page. No longer believed that words stayed where they were left. It felt like setting a trap and hoping you wouldn't be the one caught in it. That night, Claire knocked once and entered her room. She looked pale, eyes ringed with shadows that sleep hadn't touched in days. I heard it again, she whispered. Marla didn't ask what. Claire sat on the floor beside the bed, knees drawn up, back to the wall. It's not just scratching anymore. It's talking. Marla felt the weight of those words settle into her stomach like a stone. What did it say? Claire's voice dropped, almost inaudible. It said, "The story isn't finished. Then it laughed, not loud, just like it was pleased. Marla closed the journal and set it aside. She wanted to dismiss it, say it was trauma, a leftover shadow of everything they'd escaped. But she'd heard the scratching too. Not in her dreams, in the walls, and once in her own head. They sat in silence for a long time. The air felt wrong, like a room just after someone screams. Heavy, stained, waiting to echo. Marla stood, crossed to her closet, and pulled out the duffel bag she hadn't touched since the house. From it, she retrieved an old Polaroid she'd found among Claire's things after their first escape, a picture of them as kids, seated on the porch of their childhood home. In the background, barely noticeable, a window reflected something tall and dark. Something that hadn't been there when the picture was taken. She turned it over. The back was blank. It had been blank. Now, in thin, almost translucent ink, a message shimmered. Some stories bury themselves. Others dig. Marla's throat dried. Her mind reeled with questions, panic threatening to rise. She showed the photo to Claire without a word. Claire didn't blink. "I've been dreaming of that house," she said. "But it's not on Calypso Lane anymore. It's moving." That night, neither of them slept. The next morning, Marla stood outside the building waiting for Claire to join her. When she didn't come down after 15 minutes, she went back upstairs. The apartment was cold. Too cold. The windows were shut tight. The air felt like it had been drained of breath, of sound. Claire's room was empty. Her bed was untouched, her shoes still neatly by the door, the lamp on. But her journal, one she'd kept hidden in her bottom drawer, lay open on the desk. Marla picked it up. The pages were filled with writing in Claire's neat, looping hand, all of it recent, all of it familiar. The entries weren't about dreams or memories. They were letters, each one addressed to the house. I remember the room with no ceiling. I remember the voice that told me I was forgotten. I remember the window that showed me Marla's future if I stayed quiet. I remember you promising me peace if I never left. Page after page, confessions, agreements. And at the very end, a final message: you can take me back. But not her. The ink was still wet. Marla stumbled back from the desk, the journal slipping from her hands. Outside the window across the street, where there had only ever been a vacant lot, a house stood. 2 stories, peeling paint, windows like closed eyes. And as Marla watched, the front door creaked open, waiting. Not calling, not threatening, just open. Marla stared, heart cracking under the weight of it. The house had taken Claire back. Or maybe Claire had gone willingly. It didn't matter. The story hadn't ended. It had just passed into a new chapter. And this time, Marla wasn't just a survivor. She was the one who had to decide what kind of ending this story deserved. She stepped back from the window, picked up Claire's journal, and whispered the truth aloud. Not to herself, not to the room, but to the one thing she knew was listening. I'm coming back. Because some stories, no matter how deeply you bury them, know how to dig. Marla didn't go back to the house immediately, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't know how. This wasn't like last time. It wasn't on Calypso Lane anymore. That house had vanished the moment she and Claire stepped out. Now it had reappeared across the street, mocking her with its quiet, impossible relocation. It wasn't just haunting a place, it was moving with them. Waiting. Evolving. It had become untethered from its address, its wood and nails and mortar, now mere costume for something older and much more patient. And Claire had crossed its threshold again. The hours crawled. Marla stayed at the window, watching the house across the street, refusing to blink too long. The curtains never shifted. No shadows moved, but she could feel something behind the windows, watching her back, not angrily, not hungrily, just curious. A predator measuring its prey, not yet sure if it needed to pounce or wait for her to come willingly. That night, she tried to sleep, but the dreams returned. Only this time they weren't hers. She saw through Claire's eyes, Long hallways made of whispering wallpaper, stairs that spiraled into nothing, rooms filled with furniture covered in white cloth like waiting corpses. She saw a version of herself seated in a rocking chair, motionless, eyes sewn shut again, and behind it all the voice of the house, no longer words but sounds, familiar sounds, the scratching, the turning of pages, the long, slow inhale of something ancient and buried waking up. When she woke, her hands were stained with ink. Claire's journal lay open beside her pillow, though she hadn't gone to sleep with it there. A new message glared up at her, written in handwriting that was almost Claire's, but off like a signature forged by something that had only seen it once. She's writing now. She's learning. Soon, she'll forget you. That was the true horror. Not that Claire had gone back, but that she was willingly becoming part of it. The house hadn't forced her. It had seduced her, promised her peace, clarity, purpose, and she had taken it. The line between guest and resident was thin. Marla had flirted with it once before. This time, she would have to cross it with eyes wide open. She packed a bag with no illusions about returning. No rope, no flashlight, no food, just a recorder, Claire's journal, and the photo of the two of them as kids. The last tether to the real world. She crossed the street barefoot at dawn, the house looming above her like a carcass rebuilt into something that could still breathe. The front door opened before she touched it. Inside, nothing had changed, and yet everything was worse. The wallpaper still peeled, the floors still groaned, but the temperature was different now. Colder. Not physically but emotionally. Detached. Like it had outgrown its own desire to scare. It no longer wanted to haunt. It wanted to teach. A table waited in the foyer, and on it, a fresh journal. Blank. Pages white as bone. Written on the first line, tell the story again. This time from the beginning. Marla stared at it. Her mouth was dry, her heartbeat steady. That was the danger. It wasn't terrifying anymore. It was seductive. Familiar. She sat down at the table, picked up the pen it had left for her. Her hand hovered above the paper. She didn't want to write the house's version. She wanted to find Claire. So she stood. Not yet, she whispered. The pen rolled off the table and onto the floor. The pages didn't flutter. The hallway ahead opened wider. She took the left corridor. Last time, she'd gone right. This hall was longer, lined with framed photos. All of them just slightly wrong. A birthday party where every guest wore the same face. A classroom of children with mouths stitched into smiles. A wedding photo of a bride standing alone, the groom's shadow still present, though no one stood beside her. And then, there it was. A photo of Marla and Claire. Only Claire was behind the glass now, not part of the photograph, but trapped within it, eyes wide, lips pressed to the glass as if trying to scream silently through it. Marla reached out, glass cold, hard real. She pressed her palm against it. Claire. The house whispered back, she's learning. The photo rippled. Marla stepped back. Behind her, the sound started again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. This time, not from the walls. From inside the floor. She dropped to her knees, placed her ear against the hardwood. Writing. Someone was writing underneath her. Scratching letters into the floor from beneath. A message carved into the bones of the house. She pressed her hand flat. The vibration spelled out 2 words, hurry. Please. Marla stood and ran. Through hallways that bent too fast. Through doors that opened into closets and stairwells, and sometimes nothing at all. The house didn't fight her now. It let her run. Because it knew something she didn't. Because it wanted her to see. She burst into a room she'd never seen before. A nursery. A mobile hung from the ceiling, twirling slowly despite the still air. In the crib sat the journal. Not Claire's. Not hers. A new one. Its cover was stitched from cloth. Baby blue. Inside sketches. Childlike. Rough, crude drawings of her, of Claire, of the house. In one, Marla was drawn with her mouth sewn shut. In another, she was holding Claire's hand, but Claire's face was blank. And on the last page, A picture of the house, on fire, with two figures watching from the woods. Beneath the sketch, words scrawled in block letters, YOUBRNITORITBRSR. Marla dropped the book. She understood now. This wasn't a story to finish. It was a cycle to break. She turned to run. The hallway shifted faster this time, desperate to confuse her. The house was angry now, but she had the one thing it feared. A memory that hadn't yet been written. A future where she said no, and burned everything behind her. Because not all stories deserve to end. Some needed to be erased. The house was alive with motion now. Not just shifting walls or flickering lights. Living, in the way that forests breathe or tides move. Every step Marla took echoed in a dozen directions at once, bouncing back distorted, like the house was mocking her resolve. It knew. It had always known. From the moment she'd stepped onto Calypso Lane the first time, it had seen her. Not just her guilt or grief, it had seen her potential. And now, it was testing how far she'd go to undo what it had made her remember. She still clutched the crude, childlike journal. The one from the nursery with the stitched cover and the final drawing of the house engulfed in flames. The pages had weight, not just physically but emotionally, as if the paper had soaked up suffering, like gauze steeped in blood. The message had been clear, even in its simplicity: you burn it, or it burns her. But fire alone wouldn't be enough. Not here. Not in a place where time circled and truth rewrote itself like looping dialogue. Marla would need more than matches. She'd need memory. She'd need to bring the story to its knees by reminding it that not all narratives deserved preservation. The room twisted behind her as she ran. The air was heavier, thick like syrup, clogging her throat and slowing her limbs. It wasn't resistance. It was desperation. The house was no longer trying to trap her. It was trying to plead with her in the only language it knew: confusion. Rooms changed as she passed. Hallways shrank. Stairs bent downward. Pictures fell from their nails like bodies toppling in silence. The architecture betrayed its own form. Nothing was stable anymore. Then, at the end of a narrow hallway, she found the blueprint. It covered an entire wall. Drawn in chalk and ash and something that might have been dried blood, the entire house was mapped, room by room, floor by floor, including the rooms that weren't supposed to exist. Hidden chambers, negative spaces, dead ends that led to voices. And in the center, outlined in red, a room that had never been on any floor plan. Simply labeled THE. So URC. Marla stepped closer. The floor beneath her creaked and groaned like a ribcage straining under weight. Her finger hovered over the red circle. The wall pulsed. For the first time, the house spoke. Not through whispers or shifting shadows, but through the very structure of itself. The walls vibrated. The foundation trembled. "Don't open that room." Marla closed her eyes. "Claire's in there." The house hissed through its seams, its plea vibrating down her spine like cold breath. "She's part of me now," she asked to be. "No," Marla snapped. "She didn't ask. You offered." She was vulnerable. "That's not the same. She's at peace here. She doesn't hurt anymore." Marla's fist clenched around the journal. Peace is not forgetting. Peace is not pretending the pain never existed. The house screamed, boards rattling, pipes groaning, glass splintering behind the walls. But Marla didn't flinch. She'd heard this scream before. It was the sound of an ending being forced too soon. A story dragged to a close before it was ready to be let go. The house wasn't angry because it was threatened. It was angry because it was afraid of her, of what she might choose next. She turned from the blueprint and moved through the hall that bled into staircases, past the room where clocks all ticked backward, through the chamber of reflections where her stitched-eyed self wept silently from 1,000 mirrors. She remembered each place, remembered and rejected. These were tools of the house, scars it wanted her to scratch until they bled again. But she didn't stop. Finally, she found it, the door to the source. There was no knob, only a hollow impression, as if a handprint had been burned into the wood. Marla pressed her palm against it. The door side open. Inside, it wasn't a room. It was a memory. Claire sat in the center of a floor that didn't exist, suspended in light, scribbling madly into an invisible journal, her face blank, her lips moving in silence. Words floated from her pen, not landing on anything, just dissolving into the air like smoke. Her eyes were dull, glazed, but her fingers never stopped. Marla stepped forward. "Claire," the scratching didn't stop. "Claire, it's me." A flicker. Just enough hesitation for the pen to pause in midair. She looked up slowly. "You came back?" "Yes." "Why?" "To bring you home." Claire smiled faintly, as if confused. "I don't have a home anymore. I am the home. The story needs me. It writes through me." Marla knelt beside her. "No, it feeds on you. On us. But it only has power if we keep telling its story the way it wants. You can stop." Claire's hand shook. "I don't know who I am without it. You're my sister." Claire blinked. The pen dropped. "I'm scared." "So am I," Marla said. "But we still get to choose." Marla opened the stitched journal one last time and set it on the floor. She reached into her bag, pulled out the photo of them as children, now faded and curled at the edges. She placed it beside the journal. Then she did the only thing the house couldn't control. She struck a match. Claire gasped, instinctively trying to pull away, but Marla held her hand. "Let it go." The flame touched the journal first. The pages hissed and curled, the stitched cover bubbling and blackening. The photo followed. It caught faster than expected, the heat sudden, intense. The house began to collapse, not with violence, with sorrow. The walls wept. The floors sighed. Doors slammed shut behind them, not in rage, but in retreat. The house wasn't dying. It was grieving. For the stories it had consumed. For the identities it had overwritten. For the ending it never wanted but could no longer delay. Marla held Claire's hand tightly as the room dissolved around them. Light flooded in, not from above, but from within, from them. Then, quiet. Not silence, just quiet, like after the last line of a book. When the cover closes, and the world holds its breath, waiting to see what story comes next. The ash settled long before the light returned. Not sunlight, not the sterile glow of a bulb, but something gentler, like breath. Like memory no longer pressed into a mold. Marla opened her eyes slowly, not certain what she'd find, and half afraid nothing would be there at all. But there was ground beneath her, soft and cool, grass, damp earth, somewhere real, somewhere outside. Claire lay beside her, curled up like a child waking from a nightmare. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes fluttering, lips whispering words that made no sound. Marla reached for her hand and felt warmth. Real, living warmth. The house hadn't taken her. Not this time. It had tried. God, it had tried. But in the end, fire had told the story louder. The landscape around them was wrong and right all at once. Like the edge of a memory just before it becomes a dream. A wooded clearing. Quiet. Too quiet. The sky above was gray but not stormy. The kind of color that comes just before a storm remembers it has somewhere else to be. Marla sat up, brushed flakes of ash from her clothes. A burned circle surrounded them, the grass scorched in a perfect ring. No debris, no rubble. The house hadn't collapsed, it had unwritten itself. She stood, still dizzy from the collapse, and looked beyond the trees. A road stretched out there, narrow, cracked, unmarked. But it led away. And for the first time in what felt like years, the way forward wasn't blocked by fear or shifting architecture or whispered bargains. It was open, plain. Claire stirred beside her, coughing softly. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at Marla. "Did we win?" Marla helped her sit up. "No. We didn't win. We just ended the game." Claire nodded, eyes distant, as though replaying things her mouth hadn't yet found the words for. "It's so quiet." Marla glanced around. I think it finally stopped talking. Claire reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small and blackened. At first Marla thought it was a fragment of the stitched journal, But as Claire uncurled her fingers, she realized what it was. A single, warped key. Still warm, still faintly pulsing. It gave this to me before the room disappeared, Claire said. Said I'd know when to use it. Marla stared at it. You're not keeping that. I didn't want to, Claire said. But it was in my hand. I woke up with it. The key was simple. No teeth, no grooves. Just a long sliver of dark metal that looked forged rather than cut. But holding it was like holding a scream that had been silenced for too long. It vibrated with things unsaid. Marla knelt and scooped a handful of the scorched earth. Give it to me. Claire hesitated, then let the key drop into her palm. Marla pressed it into the dirt and packed soil around it until it vanished. It didn't burn. It didn't vanish in a puff of smoke. It just lay there. Dead metal. No longer magic. No longer a key to anything. They left the clearing without looking back. Back at the apartment. Everything felt wrong. Not because of haunting, but because of absence. The place had been drained of its echo. No flickering lights. No soft scratching. No distant whispers. Just walls. Floor. Ceiling. The world as it had always been, before it learned to breathe and lie. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, fingers twitching like she still needed to write. Marla made tea, but it tasted like paper. They were two people trying to return to the illusion of a before that no longer existed. You don't leave a house like that without bringing some of it with you. But they weren't trapped anymore, just tired. That night, Marla opened her new journal again. She hadn't touched it since the house tried to make her start over. The pages were still blank. She stared at the first one for a long time, then finally picked up a pen. She didn't write a warning. Didn't write a memoir. She wrote 5 simple words. This is where it stops. She closed the journal, placed it back on the shelf. Claire fell asleep on the couch, breathing slow, hands finally still. The room held, and for the first time in a long time, the night passed without interruption. No dreams, no static, no scratching, just the quiet hum of a world moving forward. No doors opening, no stories restarting, just silence and rest. Days passed, maybe weeks. Marla didn't mark time anymore. It wasn't avoidance, it was exhaustion. The kind that clung to her joints and muscles, not from running or fighting, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. She and Claire lived quietly. They ate, they walked. They tried not to talk about the house. Not out of fear, at least not the sharp kind. It was more like the ache after a wound heals, a dull reminder that something had once broken there. But silence didn't mean peace. It started with the hump. Marla first noticed it beneath the shower's hiss, just a subtle vibration under the tile. Then she heard it while brushing her teeth, a low, almost musical murmur between the pipes. She pressed her ear to the wall and felt the rhythm steady, pulsing like a faint heartbeat. At first, she dismissed it. Old buildings groaned, pipes whined, brains played tricks, until it followed her outside. One morning, while walking to the corner store, she felt it again. Not sound this time, but something deeper. A presence. Not a person, not something she could see, just an impression at the edge of her awareness. The feeling of being watched, not maliciously, not even curiously. Just observed, recorded. She spun around fast. Nothing. Only shadows that didn't move. Back home, Claire noticed too. She didn't speak of it until Marla asked directly, her voice flat, steady. Do you feel it? Claire looked up from the floor, where she'd been sketching in chalk. Patterns, symbols, mazes she didn't remember drawing. I hear it, she said, in my bones. Marla swallowed hard. What does it say? Claire's eyes clouded. It doesn't talk. Not yet. But it's remembering us. The truth settled heavy between them. The house may have burned. But stories don't die when you destroy the paper. They live in the people who told them. And worse, in the people who survived them. That night, Marla woke to find Claire standing in the hallway, head tilted, eyes closed. Listening. What is it? Marla asked quietly. Claire's voice was distant. It's learning a new shape. What do you mean? Claire turned to her. It doesn't need walls anymore. Marla's stomach dropped. The fire hadn't destroyed the house. It had freed it. It no longer needed rooms or staircases, mirrors or photographs. It had found the most reliable structure to live inside people. Their memories. Their guilt. Their need to make sense of what happened. Marla felt it then. Not just watching, but sifting through her. Pulling at her recollections, examining the fear, the choices. The final match she struck. It was building again. From her. From Claire. From every word they'd whispered in the dark. The blueprint was no longer on the wall. It was etched into their bones. Marla took Claire's hand and gripped it tight. We have to end this for good. Claire nodded slowly. But how do you end something that's become you? They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they wrote. Not in journals. On the walls. On the floors. On their arms, their legs. Every inch of skin they could reach. They wrote the truth. Not the house's truth, but their own. What they remembered. What they survived. What they lost. What they kept. And what they would no longer carry. Each word peeled the echo away. Each confession cut the blueprint loose. Marla wrote until her hands shook and her eyes blurred. Claire whispered the names of the rooms she'd been trapped in until her voice broke. And when they were finished, when every inch of their apartment had become a canvas of survival, the hum stopped. The walls held still. The presence pulled back, no longer anchored, no longer tethered to guilt or memory or silence. They didn't cry. There was no sobbing, no shouting, no cinematic collapse, just breathing. Long, slow, real. The kind you only do when you've been holding your breath for years. In the morning, they washed the words from their skin, not because they regretted them, but because they were no longer needed to remember. What mattered had already been written, in the only place the house could never touch again, their will to move forward. Without it, forever. They thought it was over, not wrapped in a bow or sealed behind glass, but done in the way tragedies eventually settle into memory. Scarred, but sealed. They had burned the story, written their own, and learned to breathe without the house drawing breath for them. But closure is a lie we tell ourselves to make peace with unfinished things. And some stories, even when you stop writing them, don't know how to stop growing. It started with the boy across the hall. 8 years old. Quiet. Liked marbles and dinosaurs. He'd wave at Marlo in the mornings with jelly on his chin and his shoes on the wrong feet. Innocent, untouched. Until the morning his mother screamed. Marla had jolted from sleep, heart already racing, because the scream wasn't panicked. It was recognition. A sound people make when something impossible becomes real. The boy was in the hallway, standing, silent, but his eyes were stitched shut. Marla froze in the doorway. Claire appeared beside her seconds later, breath catching when she saw him. The mother tried to pry the boy's eyes open, sobbing his name, begging, but the threads were real, thick and dark, pulled taut like they'd been sewn in the dark with shaking hands. A nurse at the ER said it must have been an allergic reaction. A neighbor blamed a prank. But Marla and Claire knew. That wasn't a prank. That was a message. The house hadn't followed them. It had followed the story. And now it was spreading. Claire sat by the window that night, watching shadows stretch across the street, her voice thin. We didn't close it. We only closed our door. Marla nodded. We left it behind. We walked out. But we didn't seal it. We didn't destroy it. We just stepped away. Claire turned to her. It's looking for open doors. There was a name for places like this, Marla remembered. Her grandmother had whispered about them once. Thin places. Cracks where the world didn't seal properly. Where what's behind the veil could press its face against it and breathe warm fog into your dreams. The house hadn't been a place. It had always been a crack. A thin place dressed up as wood and stone. And now that they had walked away from it, it was looking for someone else to inhabit. That night, Claire found another photo in their mailbox. A Polaroid. Modern. Fresh. The boy across the hall, standing in their building's laundry room. Behind him, a door that didn't exist. One they recognized. A cracked white door with a brass knob and red smudges on the frame. The house was here. Not built. Not visible. But opening. Marla held the photo for a long time, until the edges curled in her fingers. "We have to go back in," she said at last. Claire didn't speak for a moment. "If we do, it won't let us go again. I don't think it will let us stay out." The decision wasn't really a decision. It was inevitable. Thin places aren't just in walls or woods. They live in people. People who lie to themselves. People who bury things and pretend they're gone. People who close doors but never lock them. And the house of the story, the thing knew it. They packed only what mattered: Claire's journal, Marla's photo, the key she had buried in the scorched earth weeks ago, now mysteriously back in her drawer, gleaming clean, as if it had never touched fire. At midnight, they left the apartment, not to find the house, but to find the next thin place, because it would be there, waiting, behind a mirror in a condemned school, in the shadow of a forgotten hospital hallway, inside a box tucked beneath a child's bed. It could be anything now. It was anything now. They didn't speak on the way. They didn't need to. They knew what had to be done. Not just escape, not just survival, but closure, real, sealed, permanent, the kind of ending that demanded sacrifice, and fire, and truth spoken aloud until it bled. They stepped into the dark together, side by side, hearts steady, not because they weren't afraid, but because fear meant they still had something left to lose. And this time, they refused to let the house write that ending for them. They found the next crack in a building no one remembered. Tucked between a shuttered pawn shop and a laundromat that always smelled faintly of bleach and sorrow, it stood narrow and tall, like it had been squeezed into the block as an afterthought. No number on the door, no sign. Just a sliver of rotting wood and a tarnished handle. Humming with that low, familiar pull, the kind you don't notice until it's too late. Claire stared at it without speaking, but Marla could feel her pulse quicken beside her. It was here. The story hadn't ended. It had grown roots, stretched its fingers out into new soil, and now it was blooming again. The key turned in the lock before they even reached the door. Claire stopped walking. "It knows," she whispered. "It always did," Marla said. They stepped inside together. It didn't look like the house. Not at first. It looked like a single room, square and empty, with a thin bed against one wall and a cracked mirror on the other. No stairs, no halls, no impossible geometry. But something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. The kind of wrong that lives just beneath the skin, in the way your hand might twitch before your mind catches up. The walls pulsed softly, like lungs under plaster, and above them the ceiling shifted, not in shape but in texture, watching, breathing, listening. Claire crossed to the bed. The mattress was damp, sunken in the center like someone had been lying there for a very, very long time. Marla approached the mirror. Her reflection didn't move. It blinked too slow. It smiled when she didn't. Then it raised its hand and pressed a finger against the inside of the glass, and wrote a word in fog, WRIT. Marla turned away. "This isn't just another thin place," she said. "It's the heart." Claire touched the mattress gently. "It's dreaming of new rooms." That's what it had always been doing, hadn't it? The house wasn't static. It wasn't a structure to be mapped and destroyed. It was a living narrative, one that survived not on bricks, but on attention. Memory. Imagination. It grew wherever fear was rich and silence was deep. This was the seed. The womb. The story's dreaming place. And it wanted them to add to it. To write their way into its walls again. Claire sat down on the bed. "I remember this room," she said. Marla stared. "You've never been here, I have. Not in life. In dreams. It's where it started for me. The first time I saw the hallway that never ended. The first time I heard the scratching. The mirror flickered. Claire's reflection stood behind her now. Not in the bed, not on the floor, behind her, smiling, waiting. Marla stepped forward, her voice firm. We're not writing anything. We're ending this. For real this time. The walls began to ripple. The bed groaned. The ceiling shivered like it was made of skin. Claire clutched her head. It's loud now. Like it's screaming without sound. It doesn't want to die. It wants to be remembered. Of course it did. That was the trick. The trap. Stories don't need walls. They just need someone to listen. Someone to believe. Someone to tell others. Marla grabbed the cracked mirror from the wall and hurled it to the floor. It shattered instantly, splinters bouncing across the wood. Behind it, nothing. No wires, no plaster. Just a smooth, endless surface like a void covered in wax. She reached into her coat. The photo. The one of them as children, the one that always came back. She struck a match. No, Claire croaked. Not that. We have to, Marla said. This picture is the anchor. It keeps reappearing because it links us to the story. It's how it crawls back in. But it's us, Claire said. No, it's what it wants us to be. The match touched the corner. The photo curled, darkened, hissed. The room shrieked, not aloud, but with movement. The walls flared open into doorways. Hallways shot outward. Ceilings expanded into night skies. And in each new space, copies of them walked, some screaming, some smiling, some curled in corners writing with bleeding fingers. The house wasn't dying. It was panicking, folding in on itself, trying to preserve the parts of them it still held. Marla pulled Claire to her feet. Don't look, she said. Just walk. Where? Forward. They ran. Through copies of old rooms, through doors that closed too slowly to matter. The echoes of themselves reached for them, called their names, begged to be finished. But Marla knew the truth now. The house was never real. It was need. It was grief. It was guilt given form. And now that they'd refused to feed it, refused to add another chapter, it would starve. At the final door, they found a journal. Empty. No title. Waiting. Claire looked to Marla, eyes hollow. Do we write one last thing? No, Marla said. We don't give it an ending. Why? Marla stepped back, voice firm. Because some stories don't deserve closure. They deserve silence. And with that, she shut the journal and left it there. Unwritten. Unclaimed. They stepped through the door. And this time, the house didn't follow. They didn't remember how they got home. Not fully. One moment, they were stepping through that final door. The next, they were outside, standing in the pale morning light on a street that seemed both familiar and untouched. The sky was clear, the air clean. No scent of rot or ash. And there, behind them, where the thin place had once pulsed and opened and whispered, was nothing. Just the narrow alleyway, a wall of brick stained with time. No door, no building, no sign it had ever existed. Claire turned in a slow circle, scanning every detail like it might slip away if she blinked. Do you hear anything? She asked. Marla shook her head. No hum, no scratching. No voice. No voice. They walked home slowly, like people learning to move after being locked inside a body not quite theirs. Every streetlight, every passing car, every breeze brushing through the trees felt unreal, because it was real. Too normal, and yet terrifying in its normality. Marla caught herself waiting for the twist, for the sudden flicker of light, for the familiar shift of wood underfoot, or the voice from the wall. But nothing came. For once, nothing came. Their apartment was untouched. Cold coffee still sat on the counter. Mail still lay unopened on the floor. Time had moved without them. But the story, that living thing that had once breathed between the walls, was silent now. Not just paused, but finished. Marla didn't want to say it aloud. Didn't want to jinx it, or tempt the house, or remind the story that it had left an open page behind. So she said nothing. Neither did Claire. That night, they didn't write. Didn't light candles. Didn't listen at the walls. They simply sat on the floor, back against the couch, knees pulled to their chests, staring at nothing. letting the silence seep into them. And it didn't feel ominous. Not anymore. It felt like spaced. Space to breathe, space to exist, space to live without being translated into fear. But that silence had weight. After years of noise, internal, external, supernatural, it pressed against them like pressure on a healing bruise. They had lived too long inside a world that demanded attention, emotion, reaction. Now, without the house, without the whispering mirrors and the journals that wrote themselves, without the choices being twisted into rooms. What were they? The question sat in the room with them. Who are you when the story stops? Claire stood first, moved to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with its own rhythm. Dogs barked, tires hissed on wet pavement. Life, uncomplicated and uninterested in their pain, marched on. She spoke without turning. It's still gone. Marla rose, joining her. I know. Claire leaned her head against the glass. I don't think it can come back. Not after what we did. It could try, Marla said. But we wouldn't follow it this time. That was the true change, wasn't it? Not that the house had disappeared, but that they no longer needed it to explain their pain. They had gone into it searching for answers, meaning resolution, and what they'd found instead was reflection. Mirrors that lied, doors that punished curiosity, rooms that trapped grief until it devoured itself. But they had walked out, still scared, still scarred, but walking. Marla went to the drawer and pulled out the last item, the stitched journal. She opened it slowly. Still blank. Not a single word had been added, not a single page out of place. But the weight was different now. It wasn't invitation. It wasn't threat. It was memory. She placed it on the windowsill. If it wakes again, she said, it'll have to find someone else. Claire nodded. And if it finds them? Marla turned to her. We'll be ready, but not as its authors, as its witnesses. The room didn't respond. There were no creaks, no groans, no sudden drop in temperature. Just two women, standing in the early light of a new day, having walked out of a story that wanted to keep them forever. And for now, the silence stayed still, unbroken, and completely theirs. The word didn't spread, not at first. There were no headlines about vanishing doors, no viral posts about haunted alleys. The world didn't need another ghost story. It was already full of them, tucked between apartment walls and hospital beds, murmured during midnight drives and buried under childhood memories. But something did begin to shift, not publicly, not loudly, but quietly. In conversations cut short, in drawings left on classroom desks, in dreams shared between people who had never met. They called it different things. A dream house, a memory trap, a long hallway with too many doors. And always it began with a feeling that someone was watching, but not from outside, from inside. Marla started receiving letters. At first, only a few, handwritten, carefully worded, no return address, just a first name. And the same question phrased a dozen ways. Did you ever see a door that shouldn't be there? Or is it normal to hear scratching behind wallpaper? Or simply, am I going crazy? She never advertised, never told anyone what happened. But still, the letters came. Claire found her reading them one morning, seated cross-legged on the floor, a dozen envelopes spread around her like fallen leaves. She didn't ask where they came from. She just picked one up and began to read. They're finding it, she whispered. Pieces of it, echoes. Marla nodded. Or it's finding them. Silence filled the space between them, dense but not painful. Then Claire said, we can't ignore this. No, Marla agreed, but we also can't go back. So they did something else. They listened. They wrote back, not advice, not solutions, never instructions. Just words of recognition. That someone believed them. That they weren't imagining it. That the feeling in their chest had a name. Even if they never spoke it aloud. They didn't say the house. They didn't say the story. But they knew what it was. The thin place. The dream that builds itself around you. They kept no records. They burned every reply after it was sent, because the house fed on permanence, on story. On memory made solid. But listening, that was safe. That was quiet. That was survival. One day, a girl no older than 17 showed up at their door. She didn't speak for a long time, just held out a journal, spine cracked, pages smudged with ink. Inside were drawings of a bedroom that changed shape at night, a hallway that stretched only when she cried, a mirror that whispered in a voice that sounded like hers but wasn't. Claire invited her in without a word. They gave her tea. They let her sleep. And in the morning, when she asked if it was real, Marla answered plainly it was. But it doesn't have to be yours. From then on, the door was never locked. People came and went, quietly, cautiously, bearing stories that didn't make sense, dreams that clung like wet clothing. They didn't always stay long. Some only needed to be heard. Others needed silence. A few needed matches. But none of them were turned away. Because the truth was, the house never needed wood or windows to grow. It only needed people who believed they were alone. People who whispered their pain into the dark and heard it whisper back. Marla and Claire couldn't destroy the house. But they could interrupt it, refuse to play the roles it offered, refuse to finish the story. One day, Claire found a photo slipped beneath the door. It was old, grainy. 2 girls, standing outside a house with no number. One of them looked like Marla. The other had no face. Just shadow where eyes should be. Claire didn't show it to Marla right away. She burned it before she could, because they'd learned something vital. Not all truths were worth framing. Not all endings were worth chasing. Some doors needed to stay shut. Others never opened at all. But the ones who knocked, the ones who asked, the ones who whispered, "Did this happen to you too?" They would be heard. They would always be heard. Rain fell slow the night the final letter arrived. Not a storm, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady drizzle that made the windows weep and painted the streets in silver. Marla stood at the sink washing 2 chipped mugs when she heard the soft pap, paper sliding under the door. No knock, no footsteps. Just that now, familiar sound. She didn't move at first. Neither did Claire, curled in the armchair with a blanket over her knees, watching a candle burn low without ever lighting another. They both knew. This wasn't another cry for help. This wasn't someone asking to be heard. This was the end. Marla dried her hands and picked up the envelope. It was cream-colored, handwritten, no return address, no stamp, just one word, in black ink, open. Claire didn't speak as Marla slid it open. The page inside held only a single sentence. There is one room left. That was all. No map. No coordinates. No instructions. And yet they understood. They'd walked through fire, through memory, through mirrors and ghosts and stories that fed on grief. They'd shut the house out, starved it, burned its spine. But stories, true stories, never vanish. They wait. They shift. They become other things. And sometimes, when you've healed, they knock one last time. Not to haunt, not to trick, but to be buried properly. Claire rose, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like armor. "Where is it?" she asked. Marla folded the letter, placed it in her coat pocket. Where it always was. They took nothing but themselves. No journals. No fire. No key. Not this time. This wasn't about fighting. It was about finishing. The walk took hours. They passed familiar places, the alley where the house had vanished, the streetlight that never worked, the bus stop where Claire once stood alone at 4 in the morning, trying to forget the things she'd seen. And finally, they reached it. Not a house. Not even a building. A clearing, an open field behind a crumbling chain link fence overgrown with wild grass and dying trees. In the center, a door, standing upright, unattached, no walls, no hinges, no foundation. Just a single white door, slightly ajar, humming softly in the night. Claire reached for Marla's hand. "Do we go in?" "No," Marla said. "We finish." She stepped forward, and this time she didn't hesitate. She closed the door. Nothing grand happened. No explosion of light, no screaming, no collapse. Just a sound, soft, like a breath being exhaled after years of being held. And then the door was gone. No trace. Not even footprints in the grass. The rain stopped. Claire looked up at the sky. It's really done. Marla said nothing. But she felt it deep in her chest. The story had ended, not with fire, not with fear, with choice. With silence they walked home in the early light of dawn. The streets were still. The city slept. When they reached the apartment, there were no more letters under the door. No knocks, no dreams. Just their home, quiet, whole. Claire unpacked the last journal, the one with no title, the one they'd refused to write in. She opened to the first page and wrote only one word: closed. Then she shut it for good. Marla smiled faintly, leaned back against the wall, and let the morning sun warm her face. Some doors open, some doors close. And some, if you're lucky, you choose never to build again. The story was over, and for the first time in a long, long time, there were no more rooms left.